Good day, everyone. This is Pika Fiction bringing you another great story. Today we're exploring what if Ash saved Mewtwo, female, and she decided to wipe humanity except for her beloved Ash. If you appreciate quality storytelling, please support us by liking and subscribing. It truly makes a difference. Now, let's immerse ourselves in the story. Chapter 1, The Breaking of the World. The air was as cold and sterile as the steel walls that contained it. It tasted of recycled oxygen and the faint, sharp tang of ozone left by discharged electricity. Every footstep Ash Ketchum took on the grated metal floor was a deliberate, silent placement of heel to toe, a rhythm he practiced into instinct. Beside him, a small yellow shadow moved with the same fluid grace, Pikachu's black-tipped ears swiveling independently, mapping their unseen surroundings with a sensitivity that surpassed any technology. A low, affirmative Pika was the only sound he'd made in 10 minutes, a quiet confirmation that the corridor ahead remained empty. Ash wasn't the same boy who had left Pallet Town all those years ago. The wide-eyed wonder had been honed by 1,000 battles into a sharp, focused calm. He was taller, the lean, wiry strength of a lifelong traveler in his frame, and the perpetual optimism in his eyes was now tempered with a strategist's resolve. He wore simple, dark travel gear, functional and silent, the vibrant blues and reds of his youth packed away for a mission that required shadows, not spectacle. On his hip, nestled beside 3 other Pokeballs, was the one holding Greninja, his first choice for an infiltration this deep. But Pikachu was his partner, his other half. Where Ash went, he went. He held up a hand, a gesture that Pikachu understood without hesitation. The little mouse Pokemon flattened himself against the wall, a faint electric crackle sparking at his cheeks. Ash leaned forward, peering around the corner. The hallway stretched for 50 meters, a brightly lit kill zone with no cover. Halfway down, 2 figures in the stark white and black of Team Rocket's elite guard stood at attention. They weren't the bumbling fools he'd grown up chasing. These were soldiers, their posture rigid, their faces grim. A hulking Rhyperior and a sleek, vicious-looking Persian stood at their sides, the Pokemon's eyes scanning the corridor with predatory focus. "2," Ash whispered, his voice barely a breath. Pikachu's ear twitched in acknowledgement. "We can't go around." He unclipped a Pokeball from his belt, enlarging it in his palm. It felt cool against his skin. He didn't need to call out the name. He just needed to think it, to feel the bond that connected them. Sceptile. Speed and precision. The ball opened with a near-silent hiss of compressed air, the red light coalescing into the formidable shape of the forest Pokemon. Sceptile didn't roar. He didn't even move, beyond a slow blink of his intelligent, yellow eyes. He was already in sync with Ash, his gaze fixed on the distant guards. Ash made 2 quick, sharp gestures with his left hand. "You, the Rhyperior. Pikachu, the Persian. Distract and disable. Not destroy." His right hand pointed at the ceiling, at a thick power conduit running the length of the hall. "That's the target." Pikachu gave a tiny, fierce nod. "Shoo." Sceptile flexed his claws, the leaves on his arms rustling like dry whispers. He crouched, his powerful legs coiled like springs. Ash gave a single, sharp nod. It wasn't a battle, it was an execution. Sceptile launched forward, a green blur that was almost too fast for the human eye to track. He didn't run on the floor. He ran along the wall, his claws finding purchase in the seams of the steel plating. The first guard barely had time to shout a warning before a concentrated burst of seeds from Sceptile's bullet seed attack hammered into the Rhyperior's stone-plated knees, not to injure, but to buckle them. The giant Pokemon roared in surprise and stumbled, its immense weight making it clumsy. Simultaneously, Pikachu darted from cover. He was a lightning bolt in the truest sense. The Persian hissed and lunged, claws extended, but Pikachu was already past it. He wasn't aiming for the Pokemon. He leapt onto the second guard's back, and before the man could even react, unleashed a controlled thunderbolt. It wasn't the full, unrestrained power he used in stadium battles. This was a precise, stunning jolt. The guard's body went rigid, his muscles locked, and he collapsed in a heap. The Persian, enraged, spun to chase Pikachu, but Sceptile was already in motion. Dropping from the wall, he landed silently behind the cat Pokémon. A single, sharp leaf blade to the back of the neck, a blunt, stunning strike, not a cutting one, and the Persian slumped to the floor, unconscious. The first guard, seeing his partner and both Pokémon down, fumbled for his own Pokeball. He never got the chance. A bolt of golden electricity from Pikachu's tail whipped out and struck the ball from his hand, sending it skittering across the floor. Ash was already there, moving out of the shadows. He didn't say a word. He just met the man's terrified gaze. The guard slowly raised his hands in surrender. The entire engagement had taken less than 5 seconds. Ash walked past the defeated guard, his focus already further down the hall. Pikachu, the conduit. Pikachu scrambled up the wall, his claws easily finding holds. He reached the thick, insulated cable and began to gnaw, not with hunger, but with purpose. His cheeks sparked, channeling a specific, low-frequency current. The lights in the hallway flickered and died, replaced by the emergency red glow of backup power. A security console near the guard sparked and went dark. Door systems are on a separate grid, Ash murmured, mostly to himself. But the cameras and internal sensors on this loop are blind. We have a window. He returned Sceptile to his ball with a quiet word of thanks, the red light retracting the powerful Pokémon. The guard was still standing with his hands up, trembling. Ash didn't even look at him as he passed. The man wasn't a threat, he was an obstacle that had been cleared. As they moved deeper into the facility, a low hum began to permeate the air. It wasn't a sound, not really. It was a pressure, a vibration that Ash felt in his teeth and bones. It was a feeling of immense, concentrated pain. A psychic scream that leaked through the shielded walls of the laboratory like radiation. Pikachu's ears flattened against his head, and he let out a low, unhappy whine. "I know, buddy," Ash said, placing a hand on his partner's head. "We're close." The feeling was a magnet, pulling him forward. He had felt it 2 days ago, a sudden, piercing cry of agony in the collective unconscious of the world that only someone with a developed aura sense could perceive. It was faint, but it was familiar. It was the echo of a power he had encountered once before, on New Island, a lifetime ago. The power of Mewtwo. But this felt different. Younger. Rawer. Team Rocket had done it again. They had created another one. The corridors grew colder, the walls transitioning from plain steel to a more advanced, crystalline composite designed to dampen psychic energy. The hum grew louder, resolving into a distinct, female shriek of pure mental anguish. It made Ash's vision swim, and he had to brace himself against a wall. Pikachu pressed against his leg, a small, warm anchor in a sea of psychic torment. "Pika Pi." Pikachu said, his voice laced with concern. "I'm okay," Ash lied, pushing off the wall. "Just have to push through it." He focused his own aura, not projecting it, but wrapping it tightly around his own mind, creating a thin shield against the psychic noise. It was like wrapping his head in cloth to muffle a siren. The pain dulled, but the pressure remained. They came to a massive circular blast door, the kind used to seal nuclear reactors. There were no guards here. The psychic pressure was the only security system needed. It was so intense that an ordinary person would have been rendered unconscious, their mind overwhelmed. At the center of the door was a biometric console. "They wouldn't make it easy," Ash muttered. Pikachu looked from the console to Ash. "Pika. No, buddy. Your electricity will just trigger a lockdown. This needs a lighter touch." He unclipped his final active Pokeball. "Greninja, I need you." The Frog Ninja Pokémon materialized in a crouch, his tongue scarf wrapped around his face, his red eyes already assessing the situation. He could feel the psychic scream too, but his focus was absolute. The internal wiring, Ash said, pointing to a small maintenance panel just beside the main console. It'll be shielded, but there has to be a seam. Can you get a water shuriken in there? Short the lock mechanism without frying the whole door. Greninja didn't nod. He simply moved. He leaped onto the console, his movements impossibly silent. He ran his webbed fingers over the panel, feeling for the slightest imperfection. His eyes narrowed. He had found it. With a flick of his wrist, he formed a shuriken of compressed water, no larger than Ash's thumb. It spun in his hand, a perfect, liquid star. He didn't throw it. He pressed it against the hairline seam he had found and let it dissolve, forcing the water into the sensitive electronics within. There was a fizz, a pop, and a shower of blue sparks. The massive circular lock in the center of the blast door glowed red, then went dark. With a deep groan of tortured metal, the door began to retract into the ceiling. The psychic scream hit them like a physical blow. It was no longer a muffled hum. It was a tidal wave of pure, undiluted agony. Ash cried out and staggered back, his aura shield shattering. Pikachu squealed, sparks flying uncontrollably from his cheeks. Greninja held his ground, but his body was tense, his head bowed against the onslaught. Through the rising door, Ash saw her. She was suspended in the center of the vast, circular chamber, her slender, feline form held in place by crackling beams of energy. Her skin was a pale lavender, and her tail, longer and thinner than the Mewtwo he remembered, twitched erratically. Her eyes, a startling violet, were screwed shut in pain. On her head was a complex metal crown, a spiderweb of wires and glowing diodes that pulsed with a sickening green light. A neural inhibitor. It wasn't just blocking her power, it was turning it inward, forcing her to exist in a state of perpetual, self-inflicted torture. Dozens of scientists in white coats moved around the chamber below her, their faces illuminated by the glow of computer consoles. They were taking readings, making adjustments, their expressions a mixture of fear and clinical detachment. And on a massive screen that dominated the far wall, a familiar, cold face watched the proceedings. Giovanni. His hair was grayer, his face more lined, but the cruel arrogance in his eyes was unchanged. Subject 73's psychic output is destabilizing, one of the scientists called out, his voice tight with panic. The inhibitor is failing to compensate. Giovanni's voice boomed from the screen, smooth and utterly devoid of emotion. Then the project is a failure. We cannot risk another containment breach. The asset has become a liability. Dr. Eris, activate the failsafe. The scientist, a thin man with glasses, paled. Sir. The failsafe is terminal. We could still get valuable data, now, Doctor, Giovanni commanded. His voice was like ice. Dr. Eris swallowed hard and typed a command into his console. A new device, a heavy collar around Mewtwo's neck that Ash hadn't noticed before, began to glow with a brilliant, terrifying red energy. Mewtwo's scream intensified 1,000-fold. It was no longer just a mental sound, it was audible now, a high-pitched shriek of pain that made the very air vibrate. Her body arched, her muscles locking as the red energy from the collar began to crawl up her neck, converging on the inhibitor crown. The overload sequence has begun, the scientist reported, his voice trembling. 30 seconds to detonation. The plan went out the window. The stealth, the strategy, the careful disabling of assets, all of it evaporated in the face of this raw cruelty. This wasn't a mission anymore. It was a rescue. Greninja, water shuriken, all of them. Target the energy beams. Ash roared, his voice cutting through the psychic din, Pikachu, with me. He didn't wait for a response. He vaulted over the railing, dropping the 15 feet to the chamber floor below. He landed in a crouch, his knees absorbing the impact, and pushed off into a dead sprint. Scientists shouted in alarm, turning from their consoles as he charged through them, a blur of motion with a small yellow comet at his heels. Above, Greninja became a whirlwind of action. A dozen water shuriken flew from his hands, striking the emitters that projected the containment beams. Each hit resulted in an explosion of steam and sparks. The beams flickered and died. Freed from the energy cage, Mewtwo didn't attack. She just fell, her body limp, her mind still trapped in the agony of the inhibitor and the rapidly approaching detonation. Pikachu, Iron Tail on the collar. Ash yelled, not breaking stride. Pikachu leaped from Ash's shoulder, his tail glowing with a hard, metallic sheen. He flew through the air, a living missile aimed at the failsafe. He struck it with a deafening clang of metal on metal. The device sparked violently, but it held. The red glow only intensified. 15 seconds, someone screamed. Mewtwo hit the floor with a heavy thud just as Ash reached her. Her eyes, barely open, were glazed with pain. She looked at him, not with recognition, but with the desperate, terrified confusion of a cornered animal. He put his hand on her shoulder. It's okay. I'm going to get you out of here. He didn't know if she could understand him. Her mind was a fortress of pain. He looked at the inhibitor crown. It was the source. The failsafe was just the detonator. He had to break it. He grabbed the metal apparatus, his fingers finding purchase. He pulled. It was fused to her skull, held in place by magnetic locks. On the screen, Giovanni's eyes widened slightly in recognition. Ash Ketchum. So, the world's most sentimental fool has come to my doorstep. You are too late. You cannot stop it. Watch me. Ash snarled, pulling with all his strength. The metal groaned but didn't budge. 5 seconds. The red energy from the collar was now engulfing her entire head. The psychic shriek reached a fever pitch that cracked the glass on the nearby consoles. Ash felt a crippling pressure in his own skull, as if his brain were about to liquefy. He was out of time. His Pokémon couldn't get close enough to help without being incapacitated by the psychic blast. There was only one other option. One last, desperate gambit. A power he rarely used, one he barely understood himself. He let go of the crown. He placed both hands flat against the sides of her head, directly over the device. He closed his eyes and reached deep inside himself, past the fear, past the panic, to the quiet, steady core of blue energy that lived within him. His aura. He didn't try to attack the device. He did the opposite. He poured his own life force, his own will, into a protective shell. A brilliant, cobalt blue light erupted from his hands, enveloping Mewtwo's head and the inhibitor. It wasn't an attack, it was a shield. He was trying to contain the blast, to absorb it himself. What is he doing? A scientist yelled. Giovanni stared, his cold composure finally breaking into disbelief. Impossible. The failsafe detonated. For a split second, there was no sound. All the energy, all the psychic force, slammed inward into the aura shield Ash had created. The world went white. The pain was absolute, a universe of fire and tearing metal and psychic feedback crammed into a single, unbearable moment. It felt like every cell in his body was being ripped apart and put back together wrong. His own consciousness was a flickering candle in a hurricane. He felt the inhibitor crown shatter under his hands. He felt the failsafe discharge its energy harmlessly against his aura. And then he felt his own strength give out. The blue light died. His arms fell to his sides. The world snapped back into focus for a dizzying second before turning to black. The last thing he saw before he collapsed was a pair of wide, stunned violet eyes staring at him, the agony within them replaced by something new. Utter, complete shock. Silence. That was the first thing her new consciousness registered. For the entirety of her short, brutal existence, her mind had been a cacophony. The voices of her creators, the sting of their needles, the searing fire of their machines, and above all, the unending scream of her own power turned against her. Now, there was only silence. A deep, profound, and perfect quiet. Mewtwo opened her eyes. The laboratory was in shambles. Consoles were shattered, glass was strewn across the floor, and the scientists, the torturers, the jailers, were gone. Not unconscious. Not hiding. Gone. The space they had occupied was now simply empty air. She sat up. Her head throbbed, a phantom ache where the inhibitor had been, but her mind was clear. It was vast. She could feel the chill of the air on her skin, the hard metal of the floor beneath her. She could feel the hum of the facility's emergency power. And she could feel him. She turned her head. Ash Ketchum lay on the floor a few feet away, unconscious. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. He was broken. He had thrown himself in front of the detonation. He had shielded her. He had shattered the crown that had been her prison. A human had done this. The core of her being, a nucleus of pain and betrayal forged in a petri dish, had taught her a single, irrefutable truth: humans were a plague. They captured, they experimented, they controlled, they destroyed. They were cruel and selfish, and the world would be better off without them. This belief was as fundamental to her as her own genetic code. And yet, this human, this boy, he had fought his way through her prison, not to control her, but to free her. He had spoken to her, not with commands, but with a promise. He had sacrificed himself, shielding her with a strange, warm power that felt like life itself, a stark contrast to the cold, dead energy of the machines. She floated over to him, her movements effortless. She knelt beside his still form. His Pikachu was curled on his chest, whimpering softly, nudging its trainer's chin. The little mouse Pokemon looked up at her, its eyes filled with fear and defiance, and let out a protective spark. Mewtwo ignored it. She reached out a slender, three-fingered hand, not to touch him, but to feel the air around him. His life force was faint, flickering. The feedback from absorbing the blast had shredded his nervous system. He was dying. And as she felt his life slipping away, something within her crystallized. The rage she held for all of humanity, the searing hatred for her creators, did not vanish. It was transmuted. All of that immense, world-breaking power, all of that fury, was funneled into a single, new, absolute imperative: he must not die. Her eyes glowed with soft, pink light. She extended her power, not as a weapon, but as a healing balm. She poured her psychic energy into him, gently mending the torn synapses, soothing the frayed nerves, knitting his very essence back together. It was delicate work, like reweaving a tapestry one thread at a time. The Pikachu watched, its fear slowly giving way to awe as the color returned to Ash's face and his breathing deepened, becoming steady and calm. As she worked, her mind, now unbound and limitless, expanded. She had been created in this lab, but her mind was born of the psychic energy of the entire planet. She could feel it all. She felt the bustling cities, the endless chatter of billions of human minds, a constant, grating static of greed, fear, ambition, and hate. She felt the forests being cut down, the oceans being poisoned, the Pokemon being captured and forced to fight for sport. It was the same pain she had known in this lab, just writ large across the face of the globe. They were all the same. They were all Giovanni. They would hurt him again. They would try to use him, or control him, or destroy him for being different. His strange, beautiful power, his aura, they would covet it and fear it. They would eventually become a threat to him, just as they had been a threat to her. The world they had built was not safe for someone so selfless. The logic was cold, simple, and irrefutable. To protect him, she had to protect him from them. All of them. She finished her work. The boy was stable. He would sleep, and he would wake up whole. She looked at his peaceful face, the source of this new, earth-shattering purpose. A strange feeling bloomed in her chest, a fierce, possessive warmth that was as powerful as her rage had ever been. She had been born of science and hate, a living weapon. But in his selfless act, he had given her a new reason to exist. She would not be a weapon. She would be a shield. His shield. She stood, floating high into the air until her head nearly touched the ceiling of the ruined chamber. She closed her eyes, and for the first time, she reached out with the full, untamed totality of her power. She didn't push. She didn't blast. She simply expanded her consciousness. Her mind touched the shores of the Seafoam Islands, then spread, faster than light, across the oceans. She felt the mines in Kanto, then Johto, Hoenn, Sinnoh, Unova, Kalos, Alola, Galar. Billions of them. A screaming, chaotic ocean of human thought. She had a single, simple thought, a command that was also a wish, an act of supreme love that was also an act of supreme destruction. Be silent. It wasn't a wave of force. It wasn't a bomb. It was a gentle, psychic suggestion on a global scale. An erasure. One moment, the cacophony of humanity was there. The next, it was gone. In homes, in cars, on streets, in offices, people simply ceased to be. There were no bodies, no screams, no destruction. Just a sudden, perfect, all-encompassing silence. A world wiped clean. A kingdom made quiet and safe for its one, sleeping king. For an infinitesimal moment, as her mind touched every corner of the globe and edited the very concept of humanity out of existence, the fabric of reality groaned. A hairline crack of impossible purple-black, a flicker of something other, appeared in the deepest, darkest trench of the ocean before sealing itself shut. An echo without a source. She did not notice. Her focus was singular. She lowered herself back to the floor and settled beside the sleeping boy, curling her long tail around them both. She would watch over him. She would wait for him to wake. The world was finally quiet. The noise was gone. Now, their life together could begin. Ash woke slowly, surfacing from a deep, dreamless blackness. His first sensation was one of profound peace. There was no pain. His body felt light, healthy, and humming with a strange, residual energy. He opened his eyes. He was in the same chamber, but it was clean. The shattered glass was gone, the broken consoles repaired or removed. The harsh emergency lighting had been replaced by a soft, ambient glow that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. He was lying on something soft, a bed of what felt like woven energy. He sat up. Pikachu was asleep at his side, his small chest rising and falling rhythmically. Ash placed a hand on his head, and his partner's eyes fluttered open. A happy, relieved Pikachu chirped from his throat, and he scrambled into Ash's arms, nuzzling his chin. "Hey, buddy," Ash said, his voice raspy. He hugged Pikachu tightly. "You okay?" "Cha." Then he saw her. Mewtwo was sitting across the room, watching him. She wasn't suspended or restrained. She sat with a serene, regal posture, her violet eyes fixed on him. There was no pain in them now. There was an intelligence that was both ancient and brand new, and an unnerving, focused intensity. "You're okay," Ash said, finding his voice. He remembered the crown, the detonation, the shield of aura. "I'm glad. I am whole because of you," she said. Her voice wasn't spoken. It echoed directly in his mind, clear as a bell and smooth as silk. "You were injured. I healed you." Ash swung his legs off the energy bed, his feet touching the cold, clean floor. He felt strong. Stronger than before. "Thank you." "What happened to the scientists?" "To Giovanni?" "The noise is gone," she replied simply, a statement of fact with no malice behind it. "I removed it. I made the world quiet for you." A knot of unease tightened in Ash's stomach. "Removed it?" What do you mean, removed it? She didn't answer with words. She gestured with one hand toward the blast door, which slid open silently. Beyond it, the corridor was pristine and silent. And through a large viewport at the end of the hall, Ash could see the outside world. He walked toward it, Pikachu on his shoulder, his footsteps the only sound in the cavernous facility. He reached the thick, reinforced glass and looked out. The sun was high in the sky, casting a brilliant light over the seafoam islands. The waves crashed against the rocky shore in a steady, peaceful rhythm. The cries of windgull and polyper filled the air. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. There were no boats on the water. No sign of the Team Rocket ships that had patrolled the island. No sign of anything human at all. Where is everyone? Ash asked, his voice barely a whisper. Mewtwo appeared beside him, her reflection a pale ghost in the glass. I told you, her voice echoed in his head, laced with a gentle, patient tone one might use for a child. They are gone. All of them. All the humans. They were a threat. They were cruel and loud and they would have hurt you. So I tidied them away. Ash stared out at the empty ocean, the beautiful, sunlit, terrifyingly empty world. He thought of his mother in Pallet Town. He thought of Brock and Misty, of Gary, of all his friends and rivals spread across the globe. He thought of the billions of people he had never met. The silence of the lab was no longer peaceful. It was deafening. It was the sound of a graveyard. I did it for you, Mewtwo's voice whispered in his mind, full of unwavering, absolute devotion. I have created a paradise, just for us. A perfect, silent world. Chapter 2, The King of a Silent Kingdom. The words hung in the sterile air, heavier than any physical weight. A perfect, silent world. Ash felt his blood run cold, a glacial dread seeping into his bones that was far more chilling than the recycled air of the laboratory. He stared at Mewtwo, at her placid expression and the unwavering sincerity in her violet eyes. She believed it. She truly, horrifyingly, believed she had given him a gift. No, Ash whispered, the word catching in his throat. He took a step back, shaking his head in slow, dawning horror. Pikachu, sensing the shift in his trainer's mood from shock to visceral terror, pressed closer, a low, uncertain growl rumbling in his chest. No, you didn't. I did, Mewtwo's voice insisted in his mind, gentle but firm. The source of all your world's pain, the unending cruelty I was born from, is gone. I have excised the cancer. You are safe now. Safe. Ash's voice cracked, rising in volume. You can't just erase people. Take me back. Take me to Vermilion City. Now. It wasn't a request. It was a command born of desperation, a need to prove her wrong, to see with his own eyes that this was all just some grand, psychic illusion, a nightmare he would wake from. Mewtwo tilted her head, a gesture of mild curiosity, as if studying a fascinating but illogical puzzle. As you wish. The proof is everywhere. She didn't move, but the world warped around them. The pristine laboratory dissolved, not in a flash of light, but as if the very concept of it was being washed away by a wave of pure will. For a disorienting second, Ash felt a sensation of infinite speed, of crossing an impossible distance in no time at all. There was no wind, no sound, just a seamless transition from one reality to another. When the world solidified again, they were standing on the sun-bleached planks of the Vermilion City Pier. The salt-laced air was real. The heat of the midday sun on his skin was real. The cry of a distant Lapras echoing over the bay was real. And the silence was real. Vermilion City's port was one of the busiest in the world. It should have been a riot of noise and activity. The clang of cranes loading cargo, the shouts of sailors, the rumble of truck engines, the bustling crowds of trainers and tourists. Now, there was only the gentle lapping of water against the pylons and the lonely cries of sea Pokémon. A massive freighter, the SS Cinder, was moored at the main dock, its cargo crane frozen midway through lifting a massive container from its hold. It hung there, suspended against the bright blue sky like a monument to an interrupted moment. Smaller boats bobbed silently in their slips, ropes neatly coiled on their decks. A fishing trawler's nets were half-spooled, a cascade of shimmering silver mesh dangling just above the water. Everything was exactly as it should be, minus the people who made it all work. No. Ash breathed, his eyes wide. He broke into a run, Pikachu clinging tightly to his shoulder. He sprinted down the pier, his footsteps echoing unnervingly in the stillness. "Hello? Is anyone here?" His voice was swallowed by the vast, empty space. He ran into the city proper, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The streets were filled with cars, parked neatly along the curbs or stopped in the middle of intersections, their engines silent. A sporty convertible sat with its driver's side door wide open, keys still in the ignition. On the sidewalk, a child's bicycle lay on its side, one wheel still spinning slowly, lazily, in the sea breeze. He passed a cafe with outdoor seating. A half-eaten croissant and a cup of still steaming coffee sat on a small table. A newspaper lay beside the plate, its headline bold and clear, World Coronation Series Finals, Lance vs. Cynthia in thrilling showdown. The world had not ended. It had just stopped. Mewtwo floated silently behind him, a constant, observant presence. She didn't speak, letting the evidence present itself. This was her proof, more potent than any argument. The sheer, suffocating emptiness of it all. Ash's desperate hope was crumbling with every silent step. He changed direction, his movements sharp and panicked, driven by a new, more specific fear. "The Pokémon Center," he gasped, his breath coming in ragged bursts. "We left them at the Pokémon Center." Before the infiltration, he had made a tactical decision. A solo mission with only his fastest and most stealthy partners was the only way in. His other Pokémon, his family, he had left them in the care of Nurse Joy, promising to be back in 2 days. The thought of their Pokeballs sitting on a dark, silent shelf in an empty building sent a fresh wave of ice through his veins. He burst through the automatic glass doors of the Vermilion Pokémon Center. They slid open with a soft, familiar chime that sounded like a gunshot in the profound quiet. The large, airy lobby was spotless. The lights were on. The cheerful music that usually played on a loop was absent. And the front desk was empty. The gentle, smiling face of Nurse Joy was gone. Her pink-haired wig, a trademark of her family line, sat on a mannequin head behind the counter, a bizarrely cheerful relic in a world devoid of smiles. She was a source of kindness, Mewtwo's voice noted in his mind, a hint of genuine curiosity in her tone. Her mind was quieter than the others. Less selfish. I considered sparing her. Ash spun around, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. Considered? You considered it? Who gave you that right? Who are you to be the judge? The one with the power to do so, she answered, her logic unassailable and utterly monstrous. I judged them all. I found them wanting. They were a threat to the world, and to you. Her kindness would not have been enough to protect you from the cruelty of the rest. He had no answer for that. The sheer arrogance of her statement was breathtaking. He turned away from her, unable to look at the serene, godlike being who had appointed herself judge, jury, and executioner for his entire species. He vaulted over the counter, his sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. He ran down a short hallway to the room where trainers' Pokémon were kept. He fumbled with the keypad, his hands shaking, before realizing the door was unlocked. He pushed it open. On a long table, neatly arranged in a charging tray, were 4 Pokeballs. His Pokeballs. A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled his knees washed over him. He scooped them up, clutching them to his chest as if they were the last precious things in the universe. In this new world, they might be. He went back out into the lobby. We're going outside, he said, his voice hard. "Give us some space." Mewtwo simply nodded and phased through the wall, her form dissolving like smoke. Ash took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He walked to the park across the street from the center, a small green space with a fountain and a few benches. He stood in the center of the manicured lawn. "Okay," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Everybody, come on out." He threw the 4 pokeballs into the air. They burst open in flashes of brilliant red light, and the silence of the world was finally, blessedly broken. A thunderous, familiar roar shook the air as Charizard materialized, his massive wings spreading wide as he stretched. He craned his long neck, his blue eyes scanning the empty city with confusion, before landing with a ground-shaking thud that cracked the pavement. He let out a puff of smoke and looked at Ash, a low rumble in his chest asking the question his trainer couldn't answer. Next came Squirtle, the tiny turtle Pokémon landing with a confident hop. He still wore the pointed sunglasses of the Squirtle squad leader, and he struck a cool pose before noticing the utter lack of an audience. He pushed the glasses up his snout, his expression shifting to one of bewilderment. Bulbasaur appeared with a soft thud, his steady, pragmatic eyes taking in the scene. He looked at the silent city, at Ash's pale, grim face, and then at Charizard and Squirtle. Of the three, he seemed to grasp the wrongness of the situation most quickly, a worried frown creasing his brow. Finally, Sceptile appeared, his form materializing from the light. He had been returned to his ball after the initial infiltration. He looked around, his sharp eyes missing nothing, before his gaze locked onto Ash. It was too much. The sight of them, his family, his partners through countless journeys and battles, so full of life in a world that had been emptied of it, broke through the dam of his composure. A choked sob escaped his lips. He sank to his knees, and the tears he had been holding back finally came. Pikachu leaped from his shoulder and ran to him, patting his arm. Charizard took a hesitant step forward and lowered his massive head, nudging Ash's back with his snout, the gesture surprisingly gentle. Squirtle's cool demeanor vanished, replaced by open concern as he scurried closer. Bulbasaur extended a vine, wrapping it gently around Ash's wrist, a silent, comforting pressure. Sceptile simply stood watch, a silent, green guardian. They didn't know what was wrong, but they knew their trainer was hurting. And as always, they were there for him. He wrapped his arms around Charizard's warm neck, burying his face in the coarse orange hide, and wept. He wept for his mother, for the smell of her cooking and the warmth of her hugs. He wept for Brock's terrible jokes and Misty's fiery temper. He wept for Gary and Professor Oak, for every gym leader he'd ever faced, every rival who had pushed him to be better, every nameless face in every cheering crowd. He wept for a world that was gone, stolen from him by a gesture of twisted, obsessive love. He stayed there for a long time, surrounded by his Pokémon, their presence the only anchor in his shattered reality. When the tears finally subsided, they left behind a cold, hard stone of grief in his chest, but also a sliver of resolve. The shock was passing. The anger was beginning to burn. He stood up, wiping his face with the back of his hand. He looked at his team. "She did this," he said, his voice low and raw. "A Pokémon named Mewtwo. She got rid of everyone." Charizard let out a low, dangerous growl, a plume of fire escaping his nostrils. Squirtle crossed his arms, his face set in a grim line. Bulbasaur's vines tensed. They understood. The enemy had a name. Ash looked up at the sky. Mewtwo was hovering far above, a tiny speck against the blue, watching. Always watching. "I need to talk to her," he said to his Pokémon. "Alone." He looked at Charizard. "Stay with them. Keep them safe." Charizard nodded, a deep rumble of assent in his chest. Ash walked to the edge of the park, his back to his team. He took a breath. "Mewtwo," he yelled, his voice echoing through the empty streets. She was there instantly, materializing in front of him as silently as a thought. "You are distressed," she stated, her voice calm and analytical. The reunion with your other companions has caused you pain. Perhaps I should not have left them for you. The casual, uncomprehending cruelty of the remark reignited his anger. Don't you dare, he snarled, taking a step forward until he was right in her face, staring up into her impassive violet eyes. They're my family. They're all I have left because of you. You didn't tidy the world, you murdered it. You committed genocide. Genocide is a term for the killing of a species, she replied, her tone still maddeningly level. I did not kill them. I simply unmade them. There was no pain. No suffering. One moment they were here, and the next they were not. It was a clean, efficient solution to a complex problem. A problem? Ash shouted, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. My mother wasn't a problem. My friends weren't a complex problem. They were people. They had lives, dreams. They loved, they laughed. Don't you understand what you've taken? I understand what I have given, she countered, her voice taking on a hint of defensiveness for the first time. I have given you peace. I have given you a world where no one can ever hurt you again. Where Team Rocket cannot rise to hunt you down. Where corrupt leagues and greedy corporations cannot exploit Pokémon. Where you are not bound by their rules and their laws. I have made you a king. I never asked to be a king, he roared, the sound raw with anguish. I just wanted to be a Pokémon master. And that means being with people, battling them, learning from them, helping them. You've destroyed everything my life was about. Your life was about them, she said, her voice softening slightly. Now, your life can be about you. And me. And all the Pokémon who are now truly free. Is that not a better existence? He stared at her, at this beautiful, terrible, all-powerful creature who had saved him and then damned him in the same breath. He saw the logic in her traumatized mind. She had only ever known pain from humans, and he had been the one exception. To her, removing all other humans was the only logical way to preserve the one good thing she had ever known. It was the reasoning of a broken child given the power of a god. And it was destroying him. This isn't living, he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. This is a ghost story. You've turned the world into a ghost story, and we're the only ones left to haunt it. For the first time, a flicker of something unreadable crossed her face. A shadow of doubt. Confusion. She couldn't process his grief. It was an alien concept. To her, the removal of a threat was a positive outcome. The idea of mourning the threat itself was nonsensical. You will see, she said, the certainty returning to her voice. In time, you will see the gift I have given you. I will show you. The argument was over. He had thrown all of his pain and rage at her, and it had washed off her like water off a steel plate. He felt exhausted, hollowed out. He turned his back on her and walked back to his Pokémon, who gathered around him, a silent, protective circle. He needed to see more. He needed to confirm the impossible. Charizard, he said, his voice flat. We're going to travel. I need to see everything. Charizard let out a grunt and lowered his back. Ash climbed on, Pikachu scrambling up to his usual spot on his shoulder. Squirtle and Bulbasaur were returned to their Pokeballs. Sceptile remained out, his silent presence a comfort. You do not need him, Mewtwo's voice intruded. I can transport you anywhere in an instant. I want to fly, Ash said, not looking at her. I want to see the world you left me. He tapped Charizard's neck, and with a powerful thrust of his wings, they launched into the air. Sceptile, with a surprising leap, landed on Charizard's back behind Ash, crouching low. They rose high above Vermilion City, the pristine, empty metropolis shrinking below them. Mewtwo followed, floating effortlessly behind them like a royal escort. They flew for hours, heading west over Kanto. The landscape below was a patchwork of vibrant greens and browns. The routes between cities, usually dotted with traveling trainers, were empty. The cities themselves, Saffron, Celadon, Fuchsia, were silent, architectural husks. Herds of toros grazed peacefully on the abandoned highways. A flock of Pidgeot had made a nesting ground on the roof of the Sylph Company skyscraper, their calls echoing in the urban canyons. The Pokémon were reclaiming the world. As they flew, Ash noticed something strange. The weather was perfect. A bank of dark storm clouds had been building over the mountains to the north, but as they drew closer, it seemed to unravel. The clouds thinned and dissipated, leaving behind a flawless blue sky. The wind was always at their backs, a gentle, steady tailwind that made the flight effortless for Charizard. He glanced back. Mewtwo was watching him, her eyes glowing faintly. She wasn't just following. She was managing his journey, curating his experience. She was ensuring his comfort, smoothing out the world's rough edges for him. The thought was both comforting and deeply, deeply unsettling. She was treating him like a pet, and the world like her terrarium. As dusk began to settle, they found a clearing in a forest deep in the mountains. Charizard landed, his talons sinking into the soft earth. Ash slid off his back, his legs stiff. He released his other Pokémon, and the small clearing was suddenly filled with life. Squirtle immediately went to splash in a nearby stream. Bulbasaur found a patch of moonlight and seemed to sigh in contentment, his bulb soaking up the latent solar energy. Ash sat down by the unlit campfire pit, a relic of a former traveler, and just stared into the growing darkness. The grief was a constant, heavy weight, but beneath it, the anger was simmering, hardening into something else. A purpose. He didn't know what it was yet. Find other survivors. It seemed impossible. Try to reverse what she'd done. He had no idea how. But he knew he couldn't accept this. He couldn't live in this perfect, silent cage. Pikachu sat in his lap, munching on a berry Bulbasaur had plucked for him with a vine. Charizard lay nearby, his tail flame a warm, dancing light in the twilight. The scene was peaceful, idyllic. It was the kind of night he had dreamed of as a kid, just him and his Pokémon, alone in the wild. Now that he had it, it felt like a curse. As full darkness fell, and the moon cast long shadows through the trees, Ash noticed something out of the corner of his eye. A patch of shadow under a large oak tree seemed wrong. The other shadows were a soft, deep gray, shifting with the rustling leaves. This one was a patch of absolute, light-devouring black. It didn't move. It didn't flicker. It was a hole in the world. He stood up, his heart suddenly beating faster. Pikachu, he whispered. Pikachu's head snapped up, the berry forgotten. His ears twitched, and the fur on his back bristled. He let out a low, guttural growl, his cheeks sparking with a defensive electricity. He wasn't looking at the shadow, he was looking at the feeling it gave off. A feeling of cold, of emptiness, of something profoundly and fundamentally alien. Ash took a hesitant step toward it. What is that? He blinked, and it was gone. The shadow under the oak tree was just a normal shadow again, soft and gray. The feeling of cold vanished. He stood there for a long moment, his eyes scanning the darkness. Nothing. He shook his head. I'm just tired, he said, mostly to himself. The stress. The grief. His mind was playing tricks on him. It had to be. Pikachu, however, continued to stare at the spot, his body tense, a low growl still rumbling in his throat. He knew what he had felt. And it was not a trick of the mind. Mewtwo, hovering invisibly high above the canopy, had been watching Ash's every move. She had felt it too. A momentary flicker in the fabric of reality, a pinprick of wrongness that had vanished as soon as she focused her senses on it. A statistical anomaly. A psychic echo from the great silence. Nothing to be concerned about. Her priority was the boy. His distress was lessening. His anger was a predictable phase. Soon, he would accept his new reality. He would see the beauty in the kingdom she had built for him. Ash returned to the campfire, but the fleeting peace of the evening was shattered. He felt a new kind of chill, one that had nothing to do with the night air. He pulled his knees to his chest, Pikachu climbing back into his lap, still on high alert. He looked out at the silent forest, at the moonlit sky, at the world that was now his and his alone. He was the sole inheritor of a planet, the king of a silent kingdom. And he had never felt more alone, or more trapped, in his entire life. The fight wasn't over. He knew that now. It had just begun. Chapter 3, The Last Dragon. Days bled into a week, a seamless stretch of perfect weather and profound loneliness. Ash and his Pokémon traveled across the desolate heart of Kanto, a pilgrimage through the graveyard of his past. They walked the silent streets of Cerulean City, the empty gyms a monument to battles that would never be fought again. They stood on the shores of Cinnabar Island, its volcano dormant and peaceful, no longer threatening a bustling town that no longer existed. Each new location was another turn of the knife, another confirmation of the horrifying totality of Mewtwo's gift. Mewtwo was a constant, spectral presence. She rarely showed herself unless Ash called for her, but he always felt her. He felt her in the unnatural calm of the weather, in the way a path would be conveniently cleared of fallen logs, in the way ripe fruit always seemed to be hanging on the trees wherever they stopped to rest. She was the ghost in the machine of the world, a silent, omnipotent caretaker ensuring his journey was free of hardship. It was an act of love so controlling it felt like a cage. The arguments had ceased. Ash had screamed himself hoarse in the first few days, his rage and grief crashing against her serene, uncomprehending logic until he was left with nothing but a bone-deep exhaustion. He couldn't make her understand what she had taken, because she couldn't conceive of its value. To her, humanity was a disease, and he was the cure. How could he mourn the sickness? So, he fell into a grim, determined silence. His days were spent training with his Pokémon. Not the joyful, spirited battles of his past, but harsh, relentless drills. He pushed them, and he pushed himself, his commands sharp and precise. Charizard's flamethrower became a focused, cutting beam of heat. Sceptile's leaf blade was a blur, fast enough to slice a falling leaf into a dozen pieces. Pikachu's thunderbolt was a weapon of pinpoint accuracy. They were not preparing for a league match. They were preparing for a war. Against whom, Ash didn't know. But his very soul recoiled at the idea of this silent world being his final reality. He had to be ready for a chance to change it, no matter how slim. Mewtwo observed this new regimen with curiosity. You honed their abilities, her voice intruded one afternoon as Ash had Pikachu practice dodging a volley of high-speed seeds from Bulbasaur. There are no opponents left to defeat. Ash didn't look up. We're staying sharp, he said, his voice flat. It's what we do. It is what you did, she corrected gently. Your purpose has changed. You are a preserver now, not a competitor. He ignored her. The training was his only rebellion, his only way of asserting that he was still Ash Ketchum, the trainer, and not just the last exhibit in a living museum. One evening, they made camp at the base of M. Silver, the formidable peak a dark silhouette against the star-dusted sky. The air was thin and cold. Charizard's tail flame provided a welcome pool of warmth and light. Ash sat staring into the fire, polishing his set of 8 Kanto gym badges, their metallic surfaces gleaming. They felt like artifacts from another civilization. Suddenly, Mewtwo materialized beside the fire, her form coalescing from the darkness. Her sudden appearance was still jarring, but Ash had grown numb to it. Her expression, however, was different. It wasn't the usual placid serenity. There was a flicker of something else in her violet eyes. Annoyance. There is a noise, she said, her mental voice tight. Ash looked up, his weary apathy pierced by a sliver of interest. Noise? What kind of noise? Not a sound. A concentration of thought. Shielded. Hidden. I did not notice it before. My focus was on the larger population centers. This is a pocket of resistance. Ash's heart hammered against his ribs. A jolt of adrenaline, sharp and hot, shot through him. Resistance. The word was a lifeline. He stood up, his weariness forgotten. People. Are they people? Yes, Mewtwo confirmed, and the word was laced with a cold displeasure. Dozens of them. Their minds are a knot of fear, defiance, and a powerful, unifying will. They have hidden themselves from me. Where? Ash demanded, his voice urgent. Where are they? West of here. In the Johto region. In a place of dragons. She turned her gaze to him, and for the first time, he felt the chilling weight of her possessiveness. It is a flaw in my creation. A loose thread. I must correct it. No, Ash said, stepping in front of her, placing himself between her and the direction of Johto. His Pokémon, sensing the shift, rose to their feet. Charizard let out a low growl, smoke curling from his nostrils. Pikachu's cheek sparked. You will not touch them. They are human, she stated, as if this explained everything. They will breed. They will spread. The sickness will return. I must ensure your safety is absolute. My safety is not your concern right now. Ash shot back, his old fire returning. You will take me to them. Let me talk to them. This is my species, Mewtwo. My people. You don't get to make this decision. She studied him, her head tilted. Her power washed over the clearing, a palpable pressure that made the air feel thick and heavy. It was a reminder of the unfathomable gulf between them. She could unmake him with a thought. She could erase this entire mountain. But she wouldn't. He was the one thing in the universe she was incapable of harming. And that was his only weapon. You would protect them? She asked, a genuine thread of hurt in her voice. After all they represent? After what my kind endured at their hands? They're survivors, Ash said, his voice softening slightly but losing none of its resolve. They deserve a chance. I deserve a chance to not be the last man alive. Take me there. Please. The please was a calculated risk. A plea, not a demand. It appealed to the part of her that sought to care for him, not just control him. He saw the conflict in her eyes, the war between her cold, absolute logic and her fierce, obsessive affection for him. After a long, tense silence, she relented. Very well. I will take you. But I will be watching. If they present a threat to you, I will end them. This is not negotiable. Ash nodded, a knot of dread and hope tightening in his stomach. Agreed. He returned his Pokémon to their balls, except for Pikachu, who, as always, took his place on Ash's shoulder. Let's go. The world dissolved again. The cold mountain air was replaced by a thick, humid atmosphere that smelled of damp earth and ozone. They materialized in a dark, cavernous space, the only light coming from the faint, ethereal glow of Mewtwo herself. The sound of dripping water echoed around them. We are beneath Blackthorn City, she explained. The psychic signature emanates from the very heart of this cave system. From the Dragon's Denver. The name sent a jolt through Ash. The Dragon's Denver. A sacred place, home to a clan of dragon trainers going back generations. A place of immense history and power. A place he knew well. He had faced its gym leader, Claire, in one of his toughest Johto battles. This way, Ash said, his voice echoing in the darkness. He didn't need light. He walked with a sureness born of memory, navigating the familiar twists and turns of the cave. The noise Mewtwo had spoken of was a palpable feeling now, even to him. It was a shield of raw psychic energy, interwoven with something else, something ancient and draconic. It felt like a fortress wall made of pure willpower. As they rounded a corner, they saw it. A shimmering, golden barrier of light blocked the passage ahead. It pulsed with a steady, rhythmic energy. On the other side, he could see the flicker of torchlight and hear the faint murmur of voices. Real, human voices. The shield is powerful, Mewtwo noted, a grudging respect in her tone. A combination of human psychic potential and the natural energy of this place. It is anchored by a singular, powerful will. Impressive, for a human. Ash approached the barrier, his heart in his throat. He placed a hand on its surface. It was warm and thrummed with energy, like the flank of a massive, sleeping Pokémon. "Hello?" he called out, his voice trembling slightly. "Is anyone in there? My name is Ash Ketchum. I'm a friend." The murmuring on the other side stopped. The silence that followed was heavy with suspicion and fear. Then, a new voice cut through the tension, a voice Ash recognized instantly. It was calm, authoritative, and sharp as a shard of ice. "The dead do not walk into my den, boy." The golden barrier flickered, and a figure emerged from it, passing through the light as if it were water. He was tall and imposing, with a mane of spiky red hair that seemed to defy gravity. He wore a flowing black cape over a simple, dark uniform. His face was set in a grim, unyielding expression. It was Lance, the champion of the Indigo League, master of dragon-type Pokémon. And he was not alone. At his side, a massive Dragonite unfolded its wings, its normally gentle eyes narrowed into hard slits. Lance's gaze fell on Ash, and for a second, a flicker of disbelief crossed his face. Then his eyes moved past Ash to the glowing form of Mewtwo floating silently in the darkness behind him. Lance's expression hardened into one of pure, cold fury. "So," Lance said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "The monster has a pet. I should have known. The psychic wave that wiped out the world, it felt like her." He was referring to the first Mewtwo, the one from New Island. He didn't know this was a different one. To him, there was only one world-ending psychic abomination. "Lance, wait," Ash said, holding up his hands. "It's not what you think. She saved me." "Saved you?" Lance scoffed, a bitter, humorless sound. "By killing everyone else on the planet? By murdering your mother? Your friends? That's not salvation. That's taking a hostage." Dragonite let out a low growl, its eyes fixed on Mewtwo. The psychic pressure in the cave skyrocketed as Mewtwo met its gaze, her own power flaring in response to the perceived threat. "This is the one," Mewtwo's voice echoed in Ash's mind. "The will that anchors the shield. He is powerful. He is a threat to you. She is not a threat to me." Ash projected back with his own thoughts, a desperate plea. To Lance, he said, "Listen to me. We don't have to fight. We're all that's left. We have to work together." "Work with her?" Lance's eyes blazed. "I would sooner burn this mountain down around us. She is a plague, a crime against nature, and you." He looked at Ash, his gaze a mixture of pity and contempt. "You are either a fool or a collaborator. Either way, you are in my way." He didn't give another warning. "Dragonite," Lance commanded, his voice ringing with power. "Hyper beam." The air crackled with energy. Dragonite's mouth gaped open, and a sphere of blinding orange energy began to form. Ash knew what a direct hit from a champion's Dragonite could do. It could level a building. In this enclosed space, it would be devastating. He had seconds to act. This wasn't a battle he could win with his Pokémon. This was a battle of ideals, and he was caught in the crossfire. "He has made his choice," Mewtwo's voice said, cold and final. A sphere of swirling, dark purple psychic energy, a shadow ball of immense size and power, formed in her hands. She was going to meet the hyper beam head-on. The resulting explosion would bring the entire cave system down on all of them. "No!" Ash roared. He didn't think. He acted. He threw himself forward, not at Dragonite, not at Mewtwo, but into the space between them. He closed his eyes and reached for that core of blue energy inside him, the aura he had used to save Mewtwo's life. This time, he didn't form a shield. He let it out. A wave of brilliant, cobalt blue light erupted from his body. It wasn't an attack. It was pure, unfiltered empathy. A wave of calming, rational thought, infused with his own desperate desire for peace. It washed over the combatants, a psychic tsunami that had no physical force but carried an immense emotional weight. Dragonite, seconds from unleashing its attack, faltered. The hyper beam dissipated with a harmless fizzle. The Pokémon blinked, its rage momentarily quelled by the wave of profound calm, replaced by a deep confusion. Lance staggered back as if struck, his hand flying to his temple. He was a powerful psychic in his own right, and the unexpected mental force of Ash's aura hit him like a physical blow. He stared at Ash, his jaw slack with disbelief, seeing the nimbus of blue light that now surrounded the young trainer. But the most profound effect was on Mewtwo. The massive shadow ball in her hands dissolved into nothing. The aura felt familiar. It was the same warm, life-affirming energy that had saved her. The energy of his sacrifice. The one force in the universe that could override her destructive impulses. She looked at Ash, standing between them with his arms outstretched, his own power a visible, tangible thing, and her rage subsided, replaced by a reluctant, grudging obedience. The blue light faded, leaving Ash panting, his legs shaking from the effort. The silence that fell was thick with stunned disbelief. What was that? Lance stammered, his eyes wide, staring at Ash as if seeing him for the first time. That power, it's not a Pokémon's. It's not human. It's mine, Ash said, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. And I'm telling you, both of you, to stop. We are not enemies today. He had their attention. He had stunned a champion's Dragonite and a god-level psychic into silence. He hadn't won a battle, he had prevented one, demonstrating a power that was neither brute force nor psychic domination, but something else entirely. Something that commanded respect. From behind the golden barrier, other figures appeared, drawn by the confrontation. Ash saw a handful of the elite kimono girls of Ekritik City, several of Blackthorn's own dragon tamers, and, a familiar, spiky-haired figure in a lab coat. Well, said Gary Oak, pushing his way to the front, a sophisticated-looking scanner in his hand. He looked from Ash to Mewtwo, then at the readings on his device. Leave it to you, Ashy boy, to not only survive the end of the world but to tame the apocalypse and learn a new superpower while you're at it. His tone was sarcastic, but his eyes were sharp, analytical, and filled with a deep, unsettling concern. He wasn't looking at Mewtwo as a monster. He was looking at her as a problem to be solved. The tense standoff had been broken, but the truce was fragile, held together only by the force of Ash's will and the mystery of his power. He stood in the middle, a bridge between the last remnants of humanity and their powerful, obsessive destroyer. And as the psychic energies of the confrontation slowly settled, something deep within the rock of the mountain seemed to stir. The intense concentration of power, Dragonite's draconic energy, Mewtwo's psychic might, and Ash's raw aura, had created a resonance, a vibration that disturbed something long dormant. For a split second, a fissure of black-purple energy, larger and more defined than the flickers Ash had seen before, tore open in the solid rock wall of the cave. It was not a psychic phenomenon. It felt physical. From the tear, a dark, viscous tendril, like shadowy ink, began to crawl out. It wrapped around a stalagmite, and the rock didn't just break, it seemed to corrode, dissolving into gray dust with a faint, hissing sound. Attached to the tendril was the grotesque, half-formed shape of a tentacruel, its body twisted and wrong, its light blue skin mottled with patches of that same light-devouring black. Its eyes were empty voids. Before anyone could even react, before Lance could shout an order or Gary could finish raising his scanner, Mewtwo acted. Her eyes flashed with violet light. A telekinetic blast, invisible and instantaneous, struck the corrupted Pokémon. It didn't explode. It imploded, collapsing in on itself and vanishing with a soft pop, leaving behind only a faint, foul smell like ozone and decay. The fissure in reality snapped shut, leaving no trace. Mewtwo floated forward, her gaze fixed on the spot where the creature had been. A psychic mutation, she declared, though her voice in Ash's mind held a note of uncertainty. An echo of the Great Silence, causing instability in the local Pokémon. But Gary Oak was staring at his scanner, his face pale. That wasn't a mutation, he said, his voice low and tight with dread. The energy readings, they were negative. Not negative as in polarity. Negative as in, the opposite of energy. The opposite of matter. That thing wasn't from our world. Lance looked from Gary to the empty spot on the wall, his brow furrowed in grim understanding. They had been so focused on the enemy in front of them, they had failed to notice the one crawling through the cracks in the world. Ash looked at Mewtwo, then at Lance. The fragile truce was holding, but the nature of their conflict had just changed. It was no longer just about survival in a silent world. Something else was out there. Something that had been drawn by the silence, by the void Mewtwo had created. And it was hungry. Chapter 4, Shadows on the Throne. The truce brokered in the dragon's den was as fragile as a spider's web in a hurricane. Lance, convinced by Gary's dire warnings and Ash's unprecedented display of power, had agreed to a ceasefire. Not an alliance, he had been quick to clarify, but a temporary cessation of hostilities. He saw Mewtwo as the primary, existential threat, a walking cataclysm that needed to be neutralized. The shadow creature was a secondary, albeit deeply disturbing, anomaly. Ash, standing as the unwilling bridge between the two factions, knew that this fragile peace would not last. Lance's 50-odd survivors were a testament to human resilience, but they were a candle flickering in a world now owned by a god. Direct confrontation was suicide. He needed a different strategy. He needed a sanctuary, a defensible position where he could try to build something new, away from the immediate, combustible tension of Lance's camp. There was only one place that fit the criteria. The Tree of Beginning, he projected to Mewtwo as they flew high over the moonlit forests of Johto, leaving the dragon's den far behind. Lance had allowed them to leave, his parting gaze a promise of future conflict. Mewtwo, who had been silently observing him, tilted her head. The Great Crystal Mountain. Its geological structure is rich in symbiotic energy. A place of immense life force. Why there? It's a fortress, Ash sent back, his thoughts sharp and clear. It's isolated. Defensible. And its energy, you said it yourself. It's a place of life. Maybe it can help me, think. Maybe it can help you understand what life really means. It was a half-truth. He needed a base of operations, but he also clung to the desperate hope that the tree's profound life energy could somehow temper Mewtwo's destructive certainty, to show her a form of power that wasn't about control or erasure. An interesting hypothesis, she mused, her clinical tone betraying no emotional investment in his hope. A kingdom requires a castle. Very well. We shall build our throne there. The journey to the far-off kingdom of Rhoda took 2 days of relentless flight on Charizard's back. As they flew, Ash saw the world through new eyes. He saw not just an empty world, but a world in flux. Pokémon, free from the constraints of human civilization, were adapting in ways he'd never imagined. A colony of Magneton had merged into a single, massive entity, drawing power directly from an abandoned electrical substation. A pack of Mytiana, their coats thicker and shaggier than he'd ever seen, had learned to hunt the feral Miltank that now roamed the open plains of central Johto. It was a wild, untamed world, and while part of him, the part that had always dreamed of adventure, was awed by it, the grief for the world that had been lost was a constant, dull ache. When the Tree of Beginning finally came into view, it was as breathtaking as he remembered. It wasn't a tree of wood and leaf, but a colossal geological formation of pink and purple crystal, shaped like a gargantuan, sprawling tree. It rose from a deep canyon, its crystalline branches catching the sunlight and fracturing it into 1,000 rainbows. A river flowed from its base, the water shimmering with the tree's life-giving energy. "The aura here is potent," Mewtwo observed, her voice in his head holding a note of genuine surprise. "It is similar to your own energy, but ancient, diffuse, and planetary in scale. This place is a nexus." "It's the heart of the world," Ash said, urging Charizard down toward a large, flat ledge near the base of the tree. They established their sanctuary within the tree's crystalline core. The interior was a labyrinth of glowing crystal tunnels and vast, cathedral-like chambers, all humming with a soft, warm energy. Mewtwo, with a casual application of her power, shaped one of the largest chambers into a living space. She didn't create furniture, she persuaded the crystal itself to grow into the shapes of tables, chairs, and sleeping platforms that were both beautiful and functional. The air was clean, the light was soft, and the constant, gentle hum of the tree was deeply calming. It was here, in this strange, crystalline palace, that Ash began his new life as the unwilling king of a silent world. He took on the role of a mediator, a leader for the displaced Pokémon that were drawn to the tree's powerful aura. He settled disputes between a territorial flock of Fiero and a family of migrating Ursaring. He helped a lost school of Remoraid find their way back to the river. He used his own aura, not as a weapon, but as a tool of empathy, to understand the needs of the Pokémon and to help them coexist. It was work that gave him a sense of purpose, a fragile flicker of the person he used to be. His Pokémon were his royal court. Charizard was his enforcer, his powerful presence enough to quell most disputes before they began. Sceptile was his silent scout, exploring the vast network of tunnels within the tree. Bulbasaur, with his innate connection to plant life, became the tree's gardener, tending to the unique flora that grew in the crystal grottos. Squirtle, ever the pragmatist, organized foraging parties. And Pikachu was his chancellor, his constant companion, his moral compass whose simple, expressive reactions often cut through the most complex problems. Mewtwo saw this and was pleased. She viewed it as the natural order of things. He was the benevolent king, and she was the power behind the throne, the silent god ensuring the stability of his reign. Their domestic life fell into a strange, almost surreal routine. They would share silent meals, Ash eating the fruit Bulbasaur gathered, Mewtwo simply absorbing the tree's ambient energy. In the evenings, Ash would sit with Pikachu, telling him stories of the old world, his voice a low whisper in the vast, humming chamber. Mewtwo would listen from a distance, her expression unreadable, trying to parse the illogical concepts of friendship, rivalry, and family from his quiet tales. One evening, as Ash sat tracing the outline of his old Pokédex, its screen dark and lifeless, her voice entered his mind. "You mourn the structure of your former life. The battles, the journey, the progression. It is a void I can fill." Before Ash could ask what she meant, a section of the crystal wall opposite him began to glow. The crystal shifted and reformed, creating a perfect, life-sized, solid light replica of the Indigo Plateau's champion room. At the far end stood a shimmering, crystalline effigy of Lance. "You wish to be a champion?" Mewtwo asked. "I can give you 1,000 phantom leagues to conquer. I can recreate any opponent, any battle you desire. Your life does not have to be without purpose. I can create one for you." Ash stared at the silent, crystalline Lance, his heart twisting. It was a perfect offer, a perfect solution from her point of view. And it was the most horrific thing he had ever seen. "No," he said, his voice shaking with a sudden, cold fury. "Turn it off. That's not real. It's a puppet show. A memory. It's not the same." "Why?" she asked, genuinely confused. "The challenge is the same. The strategy is the same. The outcome is determined by your skill. Because there's no one on the other side." Ash exclaimed, standing up and pacing. "A battle is a conversation, Mewtwo. It's about two trainers and their Pokémon pushing each other, learning from each other. It's not about winning, it's about connecting. You can't replicate a soul. The crystal effigy dissolved, the wall returning to its normal, softly glowing state. The silence that followed was heavy. He had hurt her. He hadn't meant to, but his rejection of her gift was a rejection of her attempt to understand him, to make him happy. The chasm between their philosophies was as wide as ever. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, in the cold, damp depths of the dragon's den, the last bastion of humanity was not idle. Lance was a wartime champion, a brilliant strategist who had spent years leading the Pokémon G-Men against organizations like Team Rocket. He was not a man to sit and wait for a monster to decide his fate. The main cavern had been transformed into a command center. Makeshift tables were covered in maps. The kimono girls, their grace belying a deep, telepathic discipline, worked to expand Lance's psychic shield, reinforcing its weak points. Gary Oak was in his element, a whirlwind of frantic, genius-level activity. He had cannibalized every piece of technology he could find, jury-rigging a satellite uplink from salvaged parts, powering it with a team of electric-type Pokémon. Wires snaked across the floor, connecting laptops, spectral analyzers, and a humming, jury-rigged server rack. "Got it," Gary muttered, pushing his glasses up his nose. He typed a final command, and a grainy, black-and-white satellite image appeared on his main screen. It was a top-down view of the Tree of Beginning. Lance strode over, his cape sweeping behind him. "You found them." "Of course I found them," Gary said, not looking up from his screen. "Ash isn't exactly subtle. He's lighting that place up like a Christmas tree. The ambient aura has tripled since they arrived. Mewtwo is clearly drawing on the tree's energy, using it as an amplifier." He pointed to a fluctuating heat signature on the image. "And that's Charizard. Patrolling. Predictable. Can we get a message to him?" Lance asked. "I can do better than that," Gary said, a grim smile on his face. He picked up a small, sleek, dragonfly-like drone from his workbench. Stark Industries prototype. Never went to market. Long range, stealth composite shell, high-def camera. "I'm going to fly this thing right into Ash's new living room and we're going to have a little chat." Lance nodded, his expression hard. "Do it. He needs to understand his position. He is not her partner. He is her prisoner. And we are coming to set him free." Gary didn't answer. He was already calibrating the drone's flight path. He agreed with Lance, but his motives were more pragmatic. He needed data. He needed to understand the link between Ash and Mewtwo. And most importantly, he needed to know if Ash could be separated from the monster, or if the rescue would require a more permanent, tragic solution. The drone arrived 2 days later. Sceptile, perched high on a crystalline branch, saw it first, a flicker of movement that didn't belong, a dragonfly that flew too fast and too straight. He let out a sharp cry, alerting the others. The drone was fast, but it wasn't fast enough. As it zipped through the canyon toward the entrance to Ash's chamber, a blur of red and orange intercepted it. Charizard, appearing as if from nowhere, snatched the drone out of the air with his claws. He didn't crush it. He held it gently, his intelligence shining in his eyes, and landed on the ledge before Ash, presenting his prize. Ash took the drone. It was sleek, advanced, and clearly not of Team Rocket design. A small projector on its underside whirred to life, casting a holographic image of Gary Oak into the air in front of them. Gary's hologram looked around the chamber, a low whistle escaping its lips. "Nice place you've got here, Ashy boy. Very, crystalline. Bit of a lonely god vibe, but you make it work." "Gary," Ash said, a wave of complex emotions washing over him. Relief, anger, and a deep, weary sadness. "What do you want?" "To talk some sense into you," Gary's hologram said, his tone becoming serious. "We know what she did. We know you're with her. Lance thinks you're a hostage. He's planning an assault, Ash. A full-scale attack to neutralize the threat. He is a fool, Mewtwo's voice echoed in Ash's mind, dripping with contempt. His power is insignificant. He's not a fool, he's a leader trying to protect his people, Ash said aloud, looking at the hologram. An attack is a mistake. He can't win. We know, Gary said, his expression grim. That's why the attack isn't the primary objective. It's a diversion. While your pet god is busy swatting our best trainers out of the sky, a small strike team, led by me, is going to infiltrate the tree. We're not coming for you, Ash. We're coming for the tree's crystal core. My readings suggest your Mewtwo has integrated herself into its energy matrix. If I can get data from that core, I can find a way to sever her connection to it. Maybe even build a weapon based on its resonant frequency. A weapon that can shut her down. Ash stared at the hologram, his blood running cold. A weapon. They were going to use the heart of this place of life to create a weapon to kill the being who, in her own twisted way, loved him. Don't do it, Gary, Ash pleaded. You'll just make things worse. You'll force her hand. She already forced all of our hands when she wiped out 7 billion people. Gary's voice rose, his holographic image flickering with emotion. You've got Stockholm Syndrome, Ash. You're defending your captor. We are trying to save the world, and you are standing in our way. The transmission cut out. The drone's power light went dead. Gary had said his piece. The warning had been delivered. The assault came at dawn the next day. A squadron of trainers on flying Pokemon, Dragonite, Salamence, Flygon, appeared in the sky, a swarm of fury against the morning sun. Lance was at their head, his own Dragonite roaring a challenge. Mewtwo met them in the sky above the tree. She didn't even seem to be trying. Psychic barriers shimmered into existence, deflecting dragon pulses and flamethrowers. Telekinetic tendrils plucked riders from their saddles, depositing them gently but firmly on the canyon floor below, their Pokemon recalled in flashes of red light. It was not a battle, it was a god swatting at flies. But it was exactly the diversion Gary needed. While Mewtwo was occupied, a small, dark-clad team emerged from a fissure at the base of the tree. Gary led them, a device humming in his hands, guiding them through the crystal tunnels toward the core. They didn't go unnoticed. Ash, standing on the ledge, saw them. He knew he had to stop them. But he couldn't fight them. They were the last of his people. Sceptile, Bulbasaur, Squirtle, Ash commanded. Go. Don't hurt them. Just, stop them. Delay them. His 3 Pokemon nodded and disappeared into the tree, a silent, disciplined team on a mission of peaceful obstruction. Vines would sprout, blocking tunnels. Water would gush, creating impassable floods. A silent green blur would lead them on a wild goose chase through the labyrinthine corridors. But even as he gave the order, Ash knew it was a temporary solution. The real danger wasn't Gary's team or Lance's assault. The real danger was the escalating conflict itself. And it was about to manifest in the most terrifying way possible. During the chaos of the aerial battle, as Mewtwo contemptuously flicked a charging Salamence aside, a wave of psychic energy washed over the canyon. The momentary surge, combined with the raw power of the dragon's attack, created another instability. A tear in reality, blacker and more jagged than the one in the dragon's den, ripped open in the air 50 feet from the battle. From it crawled a creature of pure nightmare. It looked vaguely like a hound, but its body was made of solidified, shifting shadow, and its eyes were voids of anti-light. It had no discernible features, just a shape that screamed predator. It was a null hound. It didn't attack the dragons. It ignored them completely. It dove, impossibly fast, toward the canyon floor where one of Lance's unseated G-men was scrambling for cover, his Jengar hovering protectively in front of him. The null hound slammed into the Jengar. The ghost Pokemon let out a silent scream. It didn't faint. It didn't get knocked back. Its shadowy form began to dissolve. It flaked away like ash in the wind, its substance being unmade, its very existence erased by the hound's touch. The G-man screamed in horror as his lifelong partner vanished into screaming dust. The null hound, having consumed its prey, turned its empty gaze upward. It saw not the chaos of the battle, but something else. Mewtwo had created clones of Ash's original team, a Charizard, a Blastoise, a Venusaur, to help defend the tree's perimeter. The null hound launched itself at the cloned Venusaur. Before it could strike, Mewtwo's attention snapped to it. Her annoyance at the human attackers vanished, replaced by a surge of pure, cold fury. Unacceptable, her voice boomed, not just in Ash's mind, but in the minds of every living thing in the canyon, human and Pokémon alike. A psychic blast, so powerful it was visible as a shimmering wave of violet distortion, slammed into the null hound. The creature of shadow was instantly vaporized, annihilated with an intensity far greater than what she had used on the human attackers. The battle stopped. Lance, his trainers, and all their Pokémon stared at the spot where the Gengar had been, then at the spot where the null hound had been destroyed. The air was thick with a new, shared terror. This was not a Pokémon. This was not something that could be battled or captured. This was an enemy that fed on life itself. For the first time, Lance and Mewtwo had a common foe. A foe that was fundamentally, horrifyingly wrong. The lines of their conflict had just become terrifyingly blurred. Chapter 5, The Ghost in the Machine. The aftermath of the failed assault was a tense, echoing silence. Lance and his surviving trainers had retreated, not in defeat, but in a state of shared shock. The image of the Gengar dissolving into nothingness was seared into their minds, a horror that transcended the strategic loss of the battle. They had come to fight a monster and had instead found a devil, and the monster had been the one to destroy it. The world was no longer black and white. It was shades of terrifying gray. Within the tree of beginning, the quiet was heavy with unspoken tension. Gary's strike team had been thoroughly, almost playfully, outmaneuvered by Ash's Pokémon and had been forced to withdraw without reaching the crystal core. Ash had won. He had protected Mewtwo and his sanctuary. But it felt like a hollow victory. He had stood against the last remnants of his own kind to defend the architect of their extinction. The moral calculus of his existence was becoming impossibly twisted. He needed to get away. From the tree, from Mewtwo's constant, suffocating presence, from the weight of his own choices. He needed to find a piece of the world that was still just his. "I'm going out," he announced to the empty air of the crystalline chamber. Pikachu, dozing on a crystal platform, opened one eye. "Where will you go?" Mewtwo's voice was an instant, inevitable presence in his head. "Home," Ash said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "I'm going to Pallet Town." There was a pause, a flicker of what he was beginning to recognize as her unique form of analytical empathy. "The place of your origin. A site of significant emotional memory. This may cause you further distress." "I don't care," Ash said, his voice hard. He clipped Squirtle's and Bulbasaur's Pokeballs to his belt, leaving Sceptile to guard the tree. He walked over to Charizard, who was resting on the outer ledge, and patted the great dragon's neck. "Take me home, boy." Mewtwo didn't offer to transport him this time. She seemed to understand, on some level, that this was a journey he needed to make, not just a destination he needed to reach. She simply watched as Charizard launched into the sky, a silent, lavender specter against the crystal branches of the tree. The flight to Pallet Town was a journey through a dreamscape of memory. He saw the rolling hills where he'd first tried to catch a Pidgey, the river where he'd fished for Magikarp, the forest where he'd met a lost Caterpie. Each landmark was a ghost, a beautiful, perfectly preserved piece of a life that no longer existed. When the familiar, gentle landscape of his hometown came into view, his heart clenched. Pallet Town wasn't a city. It was a small, quiet community nestled in a green valley. And now, its quiet was absolute. It was a painting of a town, beautiful and lifeless. Charizard landed softly in the town square, his massive form seeming out of place in the quaint, empty streets. Ash slid from his back, his feet touching the familiar cobblestones. Pikachu leaped to the ground, his ears drooping as he took in the scene. He remembered this place. He remembered the smells from the bakery, the chatter from the post office, the sound of children playing in the park. Now there was only the wind. Ash walked, his footsteps the only sound. He passed Professor Oak's lab, the great white building silent, its massive windmill turning slowly, uselessly, in the breeze. He passed Gary's house, a small garden out front perfectly tended, a testament to a moment frozen in time. And then he was standing in front of his own home. It was a small, simple house with a well-tended garden. The paint was a cheerful yellow. A welcome mat sat on the front porch. The front door was slightly ajar, as if someone had just stepped out for a moment. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The smell hit him first. It was the smell of home. Faint traces of his mother's cooking, the scent of the flowers she kept in a vase on the table, the familiar, comforting scent of his own room. The house was clean, tidy. A half-finished cup of tea sat on the kitchen counter. A book lay open on the armchair in the living room, its page held by a bookmark. Everything was normal. And that was the most unbearable part. He walked through the house like a ghost, his hand trailing along the walls. He ran his fingers over the worn fabric of the living room sofa, remembering watching late-night Pokémon battles with his mom, her arm around his shoulders. He walked into the kitchen and saw the height chart she had kept on the doorframe, a series of pencil marks tracking his growth from a small boy to the young man he had become. The last mark was from just a few months ago. Pikachu, sensing his trainer's overwhelming grief, nudged his leg, his small face a mask of worry. Pika Pi. Ash didn't respond. He was in a trance, moving through the museum of his own life. He climbed the stairs to the second floor, his hand on the banister he had slid down 1,000 times as a child. He went into his bedroom. It was a chaotic, comfortable mess of trophies, posters of Pokémon champions, and souvenirs from his travels. It was the room of a boy who had been loved, who had been allowed to chase his dreams without question. And on his bedside table, in a simple silver frame, was a photograph. He picked it up, his hand trembling. It was a picture of him and his mother, taken the day he'd won the Alola League. He was holding the trophy, grinning from ear to ear, Pikachu on his shoulder, equally ecstatic. His mother, Delia Ketchum, stood beside him, her arm wrapped tightly around his waist, her face beaming with a pure, unconditional pride and love that was more brilliant than any trophy. He stared at her face, at her warm, smiling eyes, at the way her hand rested on his back. He could almost feel her touch, hear her voice telling him how proud she was, how much she loved him. And the carefully constructed walls of stoicism and anger he had built around his heart crumbled into dust. A sound tore from his throat, a raw, ragged cry of pure, undiluted loss. The photograph slipped from his fingers, clattering to the floor. He sank to his knees, his body racked with shuddering sobs. The grief was no longer a dull ache, it was a physical force, a tidal wave that dragged him under, suffocating him. He wasn't a champion. He wasn't a king. He was just a boy who missed his mom. Mewtwo materialized in the doorway, drawn by the sheer, overwhelming power of his emotional agony. She had never felt anything like it from him. His anger was a sharp, hot thing. His frustration was a turbulent current. But this was a bottomless, black ocean of pain. She didn't understand it. Your grief is illogical, her voice stated, not with cruelty, but with genuine, scientific confusion. Her removal was a necessary step to ensure your long-term security. You should feel relief, not this self-destructive sorrow. Her words, so detached, so clinical, were a spark in the darkness of his grief. He looked up, his face streaked with tears, his eyes blazing with a pain so profound it was almost a form of madness. You don't get it, he choked out, his voice hoarse. You never will. You think love is about security? About protection? You think it's about removing threats? He scrambled to his feet, gesturing wildly around the room, at the trophies, at the posters, at the whole of his childhood. My mother let me go. She let me walk into a world full of danger, full of powerful Pokémon and trainers who could have crushed me. She let me fall, she let me fail, she let me get hurt. And every single time, she was here when I came home, to tell me she was proud of me for trying, to patch me up, and to send me right back out again. That's love, Mewtwo. Love isn't locking someone in a cage to keep them safe. It's trusting them enough to let them be free. He pointed a shaking finger at the fallen photograph. She wasn't a threat. She was my home. She was the reason I could go out and face the world. You didn't just remove a person. You took my home. You took my past. You took the one person on this entire planet who loved me without needing a reason, without me having to prove anything. His words, charged with the raw power of his aura, struck her with the force of a physical blow. For the first time, her serene, logical facade cracked. She saw the image in the photograph. She felt the depth of the memory associated with it, the pure, untainted love that radiated from the image of the woman. It was a concept her mind, created in a loveless lab and forged in pain, could not process. Her entire philosophy was built on a foundation of transactional protection. I will protect you, and in return, you will be mine. This selfless, unconditional love that expected nothing in return, that found strength in vulnerability, it was an impossible variable. It broke her equation. She let you be in danger. The confusion in her voice was profound. That is not protection. That is a dereliction of duty. It's called trust. Ash screamed, his voice breaking. It's called faith. Two things you wouldn't know anything about. You don't trust me to handle myself, and you have no faith in anything but your own power. The psychic pressure in the small room became immense. But it wasn't directed at Ash. It was turning inward. Mewtwo's form flickered, her violet eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying confusion. The certainties that had defined her existence were being torn apart by a boy's grief. And as her mental fortress began to crumble, her control over the world she had seized began to falter. Miles away, the perfect, placid weather she had maintained began to fray. A sudden, violent thunderstorm erupted over the Saffron City conurbation. Hailstones the size of pokeballs hammered the empty streets. In the oceans of Hoenn, the placid currents she had controlled churned into a maelstrom, creating rogue waves that crashed against the silent, empty shores. Her psychic hold on the planet was inextricably linked to her emotional state, and for the first time since her creation, her emotions were in chaos. She clutched her head, a low moan of mental anguish escaping her lips. It was a sound that echoed not in the air, but in Ash's mind. And in that moment of shared pain, something new surfaced in her thoughts, something she had kept buried. Flickering, fragmented images flooded Ash's mind, a byproduct of her loss of control. He saw a laboratory, different from the one he'd found her in. He saw a kind-faced man with a thick mustache, Dr. Fuji. He saw a little girl, laughing. AI. The name was a whisper of old data, a ghost in her machine. He saw the girl fade, her form becoming transparent. He felt Fuji's all-consuming grief, his desperate obsession with cloning, with bringing his daughter back. He felt the moment Mewtwo's own consciousness was born, intertwined with the fading echoes of AI's and the burning grief of their shared creator. She wasn't just a weapon created by Team Rocket. She was a vessel for a father's sorrow, a failed attempt to resurrect a dead child. Her own existence was a monument to loss. She, who had never understood grief, had been born from it. The revelation struck Ash with the force of a physical blow, his anger instantly extinguished and replaced by a staggering wave of empathy. He saw her now, not as a god or a monster, but as a lonely, traumatized child, lashing out with powers she didn't understand, trying to prevent a pain that was baked into her very code. He took a step toward her. Her form was flickering violently now, her eyes screwed shut in pain. "Mewtwo," he said, his voice soft, gentle. She flinched, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions and fragmented memories. "I do not understand," her voice trembled in his head. "Love. Grief. They are the same. They are a flaw." "No," Ash said, reaching out, his hand hesitating for a moment before he placed it gently on her shoulder. Her skin was cool, and he could feel the chaotic psychic energy thrumming beneath it. "They're not a flaw. They're two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. You only grieve for what you've loved." He looked at her, his eyes clear of anger, filled only with a deep, sorrowful understanding. "You were born from Dr. Fuji's grief because he loved his daughter so much. Your pain, it's his love, twisted and confused. Just like what you've done to the world, it's your love for me, twisted and confused." She opened her eyes and looked at him. The godlike certainty was gone, replaced by a raw, profound vulnerability. She was seeing him, and he was seeing her, not as a pet or a god, but as two lonely, grieving souls in an empty world. She didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch, a silent admission of her own pain, her own confusion. And in that small, quiet house in the middle of a dead town, their bond shifted. It was no longer about a savior and the saved, a king and his keeper. It was something deeper, something more complex and real, something forged in a crucible of shared, unbearable loss. As Mewtwo's mental turmoil slowly subsided under the steady, empathetic pressure of Ash's aura, her control over the planet began to stabilize. The storms receded, the seas calmed. But the damage had been done. Her psychic shield, the barrier she had unconsciously maintained over the entire planet, had been weakened. It was thin, frayed at the edges. And in a remote, uncharted archipelago in a forgotten corner of the world, that weakness was felt. A place where the land itself was already gray and listless, where the Pokémon were few and their energy was muted. In the center of this archipelago, the weakened shield allowed the seeping influence of the null to coalesce. The very air grew cold. The sparse, gray vegetation withered into dust. The rocks began to lose their color, their texture, turning smooth and featureless. A dead zone was forming, a patch of reality where the fundamental laws of existence were being unwritten. It started small, no larger than a house, a cancerous spot on the skin of the world. But it was growing. The null was no longer just a whisper or a shadow. It had a foothold. And it was beginning to feed. Chapter 6, The Aegis Gambit. The week following the confrontation in Pallet Town was defined by a new and unnerving equilibrium. The raw, emotional honesty of that moment had changed the dynamic between Ash and Mewtwo irrevocably. The suffocating, one-sided devotion had been replaced by a fragile, tentative partnership. Mewtwo no longer tried to curate his reality, and Ash no longer saw her as a simple antagonist. He saw the ghost in her machine, the traumatized soul at her core. He had begun, improbably, to care for her, not as a captor, but as a person. They returned to the Tree of Beginning, but the atmosphere was different. There was a quietness between them that was not born of tension, but of mutual respect and a shared, unspoken grief. Mewtwo began to observe his interactions with his Pokémon not as a curious scientist studying a foreign species, but as a student trying to understand a concept that eluded her. She watched him play with Squirtle by the river, watched him groom Charizard's scales, watched him simply sit with Pikachu, the two of them sharing a silent, perfect understanding. She saw the bonds. She saw the trust. She saw the love, freely given and freely returned. And while she could not feel it herself, she was beginning to recognize its shape, to understand the void its absence had left in her own existence. But while their private world was finding a semblance of peace, the outside world was not. In the Dragon's Den, Gary Oak was working with a feverish, almost manic intensity. The drone's reconnaissance, combined with the harrowing encounter with the Null Hound, had shifted his priorities. Mewtwo was still the primary strategic threat, but the null was an existential one. One was a problem of power. The other was a problem of physics. It's an entropy entity, Gary explained, gesturing wildly at a complex diagram he'd scrawled on a whiteboard. Lance and a few of his senior G-men stood around him, their faces grim. That's the best term I have for it. It's not alive in any biological sense. It doesn't consume, it unmakes. It's the universe's delete key. And Mewtwo's great silence wasn't just a psychic event. It was a metaphysical one. She created a vacuum, a hole in the collective life force of the planet. And you know what nature abhors. A vacuum, Lance finished, his voice low. So these things, they're just pouring in to fill the void. Exactly, Gary said, stabbing a finger at the board. And it gets worse. My long-range sensors, the ones I boosted with Alakazam's help, they've picked up a dead zone. A whole damn archipelago out in the southern seas where the energy readings are flatlining. Not just low. They're dropping. Every day, the zone gets bigger. The null isn't just leaking in anymore. It's building a nest. He turned away from the board and picked up a heavy, metallic object from his workbench. It was a sphere, about the size of a bowling ball, made of a polished, gunmetal gray alloy. Intricate silver circuits were etched into its surface, all converging on a large, crystalline lens at its center. Which brings me to this, Gary said, his voice dropping. Project Aegis. Lance eyed the device with suspicion. I thought your plan was to build a weapon based on the tree's resonant frequency. Change of plans. A weapon to kill Mewtwo is useless if the world she's on dissolves into nothingness around us, Gary shot back. And besides, my first plan was flawed. I wanted to use the tree's energy against her. But after what you told me about Ash's little light show, I realized I was thinking too small. Why use the tree's power when I can use hers? He tapped the sphere. This isn't a weapon. It's a mirror. A psychic feedback loop. Giovanni's labs were full of data on psychic inhibitors, devices designed to turn a psychic's power back on itself. I've taken that principle and amplified it 1,000 times. This device won't kill Mewtwo. It's designed to trap her. To absorb her immense psychic output, channel it through this crystalline matrix, and fire it right back at her. It will create a feedback loop that should, theoretically, force her into a state of psychic catatonia. A coma. You want to put her to sleep, Lance said, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. I want to take the god off the board so we can deal with the devil, Gary corrected. With Mewtwo neutralized, we can focus all our resources on this null problem. And maybe, just maybe, with her unconscious, Ash will finally come to his senses and start acting like the hero he's supposed to be, not the monster's consort. The plan was audacious. It was dangerous. And it was their only shot. The gambit was set. Their bait couldn't be human, Mewtwo would see that as a simple culling of the herd. It had to be something she felt a responsibility to protect. It had to be a legendary Pokémon. Finding one was easier than it should have been. In the now silent world, the great guardians were stirring. Without the constant hum of humanity to contend with, their ancient senses were more acute. Lugia, the guardian of the seas, had been circling the growing dead zone for days, its own powerful psychic abilities sensing the deep, spreading wrongness of the place. It was a simple matter for the Kimono girls, with their deep connection to the legends of Johto, to reach out to the great beast, to share their fear and their desperate plan. Ash felt the disturbance first. It was a tremor in the global consciousness, a psychic cry of pain and confusion that cut through the peace of the tree of beginning. He was meditating with Pikachu and Mewtwo, trying to teach her the basics of aura control, of feeling the life around her rather than just analyzing it. The feeling came like a cold shock. It was the feeling of a great, powerful entity in distress. Lugia, Mewtwo's voice was sharp, analytical. The guardian of the seas. Its psychic voice is in turmoil. It is near the southern archipelago, where the anomaly is located. Ash shot to his feet. The dead zone Gary was talking about. Mewtwo went still, her eyes losing focus as she extended her senses across the globe. The zone has expanded. Its negative energy signature is significant. And there is something else. Traces of human psychic energy. Lance. And the one you call Gary. Her voice was laced with suspicion. They are there. It's a trap, Ash said instantly, the pieces clicking together in his mind. They're using Lugia as bait. It is an obvious and clumsy one, Mewtwo said with a dismissive air. Yet, she turned her gaze south, a flicker of something that looked like concern in her eyes. But Lugia is one of this world's primary balancing forces. Its distress is a genuine threat to the planetary ecosystem. The null's corruption must not be allowed to claim it. She was going. He could feel it in her resolve. Her logic was absolute, a key component of her world, the world she had created for him, was under threat. It was her duty to protect it. It was the same logic that had led her to protect him, the same logic that had destroyed humanity. Don't go, Ash pleaded, stepping in front of her. This is what they want. They want to separate us. They want to draw you out. I am not so easily defeated, she said, her voice filled with the old, familiar arrogance. Their technology is primitive. Their power is finite. I will deal with the null, I will calm the guardian, and I will discipline the belligerent children who believe they can challenge me. She began to glow, preparing to teleport. Wait. Ash said, grabbing her arm. It was the first time he had initiated physical contact with her since Pallet Town. She stopped, surprised, looking down at his hand on her arm. If you're going, I'm going with you. We do this together. She looked at him, and for a moment, he saw that same conflict in her eyes, the war between her protective instincts and his own infuriating free will. He was a variable she couldn't control, the one weakness in her perfect, logical world. Your presence will complicate the situation, she said, but there was no force behind the words. Good, Ash said, a grim smile on his face. Let's go complicate things. He hopped on Charizard's back, Pikachu taking his place on his shoulder. Lead the way. She did not teleport them. She flew. A silent, lavender comet streaking through the upper atmosphere at impossible speeds, with Charizard struggling to keep pace behind her. They crossed continents in minutes, the world a blur of color below. The southern archipelago was a grim sight. What should have been a chain of lush, volcanic islands was instead a cancerous smear of gray. The water around the islands was flat and black, absorbing the light. There was no sign of life, no seabirds, no fish breaking the surface. And in the center of the largest island, Lugia was trapped. It wasn't a physical cage. Great, shimmering ropes of shadow, tendrils of the null's corrupting influence, had wrapped around the majestic Pokémon, draining its energy, its very essence. Lugia thrashed, letting out psychic roars of pain and fury, but every movement only seemed to tighten the tendril's grip. Hovering a safe distance away was Lance and his team of dragon riders. And on a cliff overlooking the scene, Gary stood beside the Aegis device, which was mounted on a heavy tripod, its crystal lens aimed directly at the unfolding chaos. There she is, Gary said, his voice tight, watching Mewtwo's approach on his scanner. Right on schedule. Get ready. Mewtwo didn't even acknowledge the humans. Her entire focus was on the corruption enveloping Lugia. This was an affront to her perfect world, a stain that needed to be cleansed. She descended like a vengeful angel, her hands crackling with psychic power. Now, Lance. Gary yelled into his communicator. Lance gave the order. All units, concentrate your fire. Operation Maelstrom. It was a feint, but a spectacular one. His dozen dragon-type Pokémon didn't attack Mewtwo. They attacked the ocean around the island. Hyper beams, dragon pulses, and flamethrowers slammed into the black water, sending up massive plumes of steam and superheated spray. The chaos was immense, a calculated sensory overload designed to distract and disorient. It didn't work. Mewtwo barely seemed to notice. She was above such petty distractions. She raised her hands, preparing to unleash a psychic wave to disintegrate the null tendrils. And that's when Ash saw the real trap. The Aegis device. It wasn't aimed at Mewtwo. It was aimed at the spot between Mewtwo and Lugia. Gary wasn't just planning to use Mewtwo's power. He was planning to use the nulls as well. Mewtwo, stop! Ash yelled, but his voice was lost in the roar of the dragon attacks. He sent the thought, a sharp, panicked burst of aura. It's the device. The one on the cliff. She heard him. She turned her head, her eyes locking onto the gleaming sphere of the Aegis. She saw Gary standing beside it, his hand on a switch. She understood. But it was too late. Her battle instincts, her deep-seated rage at the null's corruption, and her arrogance had betrayed her. She had already gathered the power. A massive amount of it. Fire! Gary screamed. He didn't activate the Aegis. He activated a dozen smaller devices planted around the island. Emitters. They fired beams of focused energy that struck Lugia, not harming it, but causing the null tendrils around it to writhe and lash out in a frenzy. A huge, thick tendril of pure anti-energy shot out from the mass, not at Mewtwo, but directly at the Aegis device. It was a brilliant, insane gambit. Gary was using the null itself as a conductor. The null energy slammed into the Aegis's crystal lens. At the same instant, Mewtwo, realizing the true nature of the trap, tried to discharge her own power, firing a concentrated psychic blast to destroy the device. The two forces met inside the Aegis's core. The pure, creative psychic energy of a god, and the pure, unmaking anti-energy of the void. Opposites. An unstoppable force meeting an immovable object. The Aegis device did not explode. It did exactly what Gary had designed it to do. It absorbed, it channeled, and it reflected. A beam of scintillating, rainbow-colored energy, a horrifying fusion of creation and oblivion, erupted from the Aegis. It was aimed directly at Mewtwo. She threw up a psychic shield, but it was like trying to stop a tsunami with a pane of glass. The beam struck her. The sound was not an explosion. It was a scream that tore through the fabric of reality itself. It was the sound of a god being broken. Mewtwo was thrown backward through the air, her body convulsing. Her psychic armor, the invisible shield of energy that was as much a part of her as her own skin, began to crack. Visible fissures of rainbow light spiderwebbed across her form. She was being torn apart from the inside out. It's working! Gary yelled, his voice a mixture of triumph and terror as he watched the readings on his console go off the charts. The feedback loop is established. She can't break it. But Ash, watching from Charizard's back, saw something else. He saw the Aegis device begin to overload, the metal glowing cherry red. He saw the cracks forming not just on Mewtwo, but in the air around her. The sheer, concentrated power of the blast, the collision of psychic and null energy, was doing more than just hurting her. It was ripping a hole in the world. Pikachu, Ash said, his voice deadly calm. We're going in. He didn't wait for the feedback loop to finish its work. He urged Charizard into a steep dive, straight toward the struggling Mewtwo. He had one chance. Not to stop the device, but to disrupt the loop. He reached her just as a particularly violent spasm racked her body. Her eyes, wide with agony, met his. He didn't hesitate. He did the only thing he could think of. He reached out with his own aura, not as a shield, not as a weapon, but as a circuit breaker. He pushed his own life force into the chaotic storm of energy that surrounded her. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. His relatively minuscule power, when introduced into the divine level equation, broke the feedback loop. The beam from the Aegis sputtered and died. But the resulting explosion was immense. A wave of pure, untethered energy, a mixture of psychic, null, and aura, erupted from Mewtwo's position. It vaporized the top of the cliff, obliterating the Aegis device and sending Gary diving for cover. It threw Lance's dragon riders from the sky. It slammed into Charizard, sending him and Ash tumbling through the air. And at the heart of the blast, where the opposing forces had met and torn a hole in the world, reality gave way. A massive, stable gateway to the null's dimension ripped open. It was a swirling vortex of black and purple, a hungry mouth leading to a realm of utter nothingness. The dead zone, which had been slowly expanding, now surged outward, the grey tide of uncreation pouring through the breach, consuming the island in seconds. The null was no longer leaking in. The floodgates were open. Ash, struggling to stay conscious, saw it all from his spiraling descent. He saw the world being eaten. And he saw Mewtwo, her light dimmed, her armor shattered, her body scarred with the rainbow cracks of the Aegis's attack, falling limply toward the black, hungry sea. Chapter 7, An Unholy Alliance. The world was a cacophony of roaring wind and screaming reality. Ash wrestled for control, his body tumbling through the air, the force of the explosion having ripped him from Charizard's back. He saw the world in fractured, terrifying snapshots, Charizard, struggling to right himself, one wing clearly singed, the swirling, hungry vortex of the null gateway, a wound in the sky, and Mewtwo, a falling star of fading lavender light, plummeting toward the churning, black water. There was no choice. No calculation. Only instinct. He angled his body, a desperate, mid-air correction. Pikachu, use your tail. A grapple. Pikachu, clinging to his trainer's jacket with a death grip, understood instantly. He leaped, his tail extending like a whip, glowing with the faint energy of an iron tail to give it weight and strength. It wrapped around Ash's ankle just as Ash shot his hand out, his fingers brushing, then catching, Mewtwo's limp, three-fingered hand. The connection sent a jolt of raw, chaotic energy through him. Her skin was cold, and the rainbow-colored cracks that spiderwebbed her body pulsed with a sickening, unstable light. He could feel her pain, her weakness, her consciousness a flickering ember in a hurricane. For a moment, he feared the contact alone would unmake him. Charizard roared, a sound of fury and desperation. He beat his powerful wings, fighting the turbulent air, and swooped beneath them. Ash, with Pikachu as his anchor and Mewtwo as his dead weight, crashed onto his partner's broad back, the impact knocking the wind out of him. They leveled out, circling the maelstrom. The scene was one of utter devastation. The lush island was gone, consumed by the creeping grey tide of the null. The vortex, now easily a mile wide, dominated the sky, its tendrils of anti-energy licking at the clouds. Lance's dragons were in disarray, struggling against the unnatural winds and the palpable aura of dread that radiated from the breach. Ash looked down at Mewtwo. She was unconscious, her breathing shallow. The psychic power that normally swirled around her like a royal mantle was gone, leaving her feeling small and terrifyingly mortal. He gently laid her down on Charizard's back, shielding her body with his own. He was her protector now. The irony was so bitter it almost made him laugh. But there was no time for irony. There was only the creeping, world-eating tide below. The null wasn't just expanding, it was corrupting. The black water of the ocean hissed and steamed where the grey land met it, turning into a thick, sludgy substance that was neither liquid nor solid. A flock of wind gull, caught in the expanding radius of the null's influence, didn't fall from the sky. They simply faded, their forms becoming translucent before winking out of existence. This was an enemy that didn't play by the rules. It didn't battle. It unbattled. Lance. Ash roared, his voice raw. He had to get their attention. He had to make them see. He urged Charizard higher, above the chaos, a clear silhouette against the bruised, stormy sky. Down below, on a rocky outcrop that was rapidly shrinking as the null tide advanced, Lance was rallying his few remaining conscious trainers. Gary, his clothes torn and his face bleeding from a cut on his forehead, was frantically trying to get a reading on a handheld device, its screen cracked and flickering. They looked up. They saw him. They saw the unconscious form of Mewtwo lying before him on the dragon's back. And their first, instinctual reaction was hostility. One of Lance's trainers, a young woman on a flygon, pointed a trembling finger. "She's weakened. Champion, this is our chance." Lance held up a hand, his face a grim mask of conflict. His plan had worked, and it had failed spectacularly. He had brought the god to her knees, but in doing so, had opened the gates of hell. "Hold your fire," Lance commanded, his voice tight. Ash knew he had only one chance. He couldn't shout over the wind. He couldn't reason with them from this distance. He had to do the one thing they would never expect. He had to trust them. He pointed Charizard down. They dove, a streak of orange and black, straight toward the last, tiny pocket of human resistance. It was an act of supreme vulnerability. A landing, not an attack. He landed on the shrinking rock, a dozen feet from Lance's position. Charizard hit the ground with a defiant roar, his tail flame burning brightly against the encroaching gray. He spread his wings, a protective shield over the unconscious Mewtwo. Pikachu leaped from Ash's shoulder, landing in front of him, his body low, his cheeks sparking, a tiny, furious guardian daring anyone to take another step. Ash stood alone, facing them. The last champion of a dead world, his rival, and the handful of survivors who saw him as a traitor. The wind whipped at his jacket. The roar of the Null Gateway was a constant, deafening thunder. "Are you insane?" Gary yelled, stumbling over to him. "Bringing her here. They'll tear her apart. They'll tear you apart." "Then let them try," Ash said, his voice quiet but carrying with an unnatural authority. His gaze never left Lance. "Look around you, Lance. Your gambit failed. You traded a controllable monster for an uncontrollable apocalypse. You can stand here and try to finish the job, and we can all get erased together. Or you can listen to me." Lance walked forward, his own Dragonite landing behind him, a mirror of Charizard's protective stance. The two great dragons eyed each other, old rivals in a new and terrifying war. Lance's eyes were hard, filled with a righteous fury that had sustained him his entire life. "Listen to you." Lance's voice was dangerously low. "You stand there, protecting the creature that murdered our world, and you demand that I listen?" "I'm not demanding," Ash said, taking a step forward, his hands open and empty at his sides. "I'm telling you a fact. Look at her." He gestured back at Mewtwo. "She's the only one who has hurt one of these things. She's the only one who understands, on a fundamental level, what they are. And look at this." He pointed to the swirling vortex. "This is her fault. The great silence, the vacuum it created," she rang the dinner bell. "This null, whatever it is, it feeds on nothingness. And she served it an all-you-can-eat buffet." The brutal, simple logic of it hit them with the force of a physical blow. Gary stared, his scientific mind rapidly processing the new data. Ash was right. It made a horrifying kind of sense. "So we're doomed," the young trainer on the flygon said, her voice filled with despair. "Her power created the problem, and now she has no power left to fix it." "No," Ash said, his gaze locking with Lance's once more. "You're wrong. She doesn't have the power to fix it. Not alone." He took another step, closing the distance until they were only feet apart. The tension was thick enough to taste. "But we do. You're dragons. You're trainers." Gary's brain. He jabbed a thumb back at himself. "My team. And her." Lance stared at him, his internal battle raging in his eyes. Every instinct, every fiber of his being, screamed at him to destroy the creature that had caused so much pain. She was the symbol of their loss, the architect of their grief. And Ash was asking him to accept her as a savior. An alliance? Lance scoffed, the word tasting like poison. You want an alliance with that thing? I want to survive. Ash's voice cracked with the strain of the last few days, the last few hours. I want a world for your people to live in. I want a world where we have a chance to rebuild, not just a few more hours before we're turned into dust. I don't care if you hate her. I hate what she did, too. But right now, she is not the enemy. That, he gestured to the vortex, is the enemy. And it is not going to wait for us to sort out our feelings. Suddenly, as if to punctuate his words, the null tide surged. The rock beneath their feet trembled, and a large chunk of it simply dissolved into grey slush, pitching one of Lance's trainers and his Skarmory into the encroaching nothingness. They vanished without a scream. The raw, immediate horror of the moment broke the stalemate. He's right, Gary said, his voice shaking but firm. He held up his damaged scanner. The breach is stabilizing. It's creating a semi-permanent gateway. And the energy readings, my God, the energy it's drawing from our dimension is increasing exponentially. It's not just consuming the island. It's consuming reality itself. At this rate, we don't have days. We have hours. Lance looked from Gary's terrified face to Ash's determined one. He looked at his own dwindling force, at the fear in their eyes. And he looked at the unconscious monster on the back of the dragon, her very presence a testament to his own hubris. He had sought power to defeat her, and in his quest, had unleashed a greater doom. There was a grim, poetic justice to it. He closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He was the champion. The leader. The last bastion of human authority. And his authority had led them to the brink of annihilation. Maybe it was time for a new kind of authority. He opened his eyes. The fury was gone, replaced by a cold, hard pragmatism. What's the plan, Ketchum? He asked. The question hung in the air, more powerful than any hyper beam. It was a concession. An abdication. A desperate passing of the torch. Ash felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders. He was no longer just a trainer. He was no longer a king in a crystal castle. He was a commander. He didn't hesitate. He had been forming the plan in the back of his mind ever since he'd landed. Gary, I need to know what's at the heart of that thing. The core. The source. Is it a creature? A machine? What are we fighting? Gary was already working, his fingers flying over his damaged device. I'm trying to get a lock. The interference is massive. It's like trying to get a signal in the middle of a black hole. But there is a focal point. A concentration of negative energy. A heart. Good, Ash said. He turned to Lance. Your flyers are our only advantage. I need a vanguard. A hammer. Something to punch a hole through whatever physical defenses it has and draw its attention. Your dragons are the strongest things we have. Lance nodded, his role shifting from leader to general. We can do that. It will be a one-way trip for some of us. I know, Ash said, his voice grim. But it's the only way. He looked back at Charizard, at Mewtwo's still form. And we have the ace. The only thing in this world that can fight the null on its own terms. She's unconscious, the Flygon trainer protested. Then we wake her up, Ash said. He knelt beside Mewtwo, placing a hand on her cracked, cold shoulder. He closed his eyes, focusing, reaching for his own aura. It wasn't strong enough. He couldn't just pour life into her. The Aegis's attack had done more than just wound her, it had fundamentally damaged her connection to her own power. He looked at Lance. I need your help. You and the kimono girls. Your psychic shield held her off before. It's based on life, on will. I need you to channel that into her. Not as a shield, but as a current. We need to jumpstart her. It was the ultimate test of the new alliance. He was asking them to give their strength, their life force, to the very creature they had sworn to destroy. Lance looked at the faces of his people, then at Ash, then at the dying world around them. He took a deep breath. You heard him, he said, his voice ringing with renewed authority. Form a circle. We're about to perform the most ironic healing in the history of the world. The trainers, their fear warring with their ingrained loyalty to their champion, moved into position. The kimono girls, who had been maintaining a desperate, low-level shield, came forward. They formed a circle around Charizard, around Ash and the fallen god. It's a bitter pill to swallow, Ketchum, Lance said, taking his place in the circle opposite Ash. Then swallow it fast, Ash replied, not looking up from Mewtwo. We're running out of time. Lance met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw not a rival, not a collaborator, but a leader. He nodded. On my mark. They closed their eyes. A faint, golden light began to glow from Lance, from the kimono girls, from the other psychically gifted trainers. It was the light of their will, their life force. It flowed from them, converging, not on Ash, but on Mewtwo. Ash placed both his hands on her, his own blue aura flaring to life, acting as a conduit, a bridge, to guide their combined energy into her broken form. It was an unholy alliance, a desperate, blasphemous prayer. The last remnants of humanity, giving their all to resurrect their destroyer, in the desperate hope that she might become their savior. Chapter 8, To mend the world. The feeling was like trying to jumpstart a dead star. The combined life force of Lance's psychics, a river of golden energy, poured into Mewtwo's inert form, guided and shaped by the cobalt blue conduit of Ash's aura. But her internal state was a wasteland. The Aegis hadn't just drained her power, it had shattered the pathways that connected her to it. The energy they poured in had nowhere to go, dissipating into the chaotic rainbow fissures that crisscrossed her body. It's not working, one of the kimono girls cried out, sweat beading on her brow. Her internal matrix is shattered. We're just pouring water into a broken cup. Then we make a new cup. Ash gritted out, his own energy draining at an alarming rate. He was the focal point, the eye of the hurricane, and the strain was immense. He could feel the cold, dead emptiness inside Mewtwo, and it was terrifying. You must feel it, a voice whispered in his mind. Not Mewtwo's. A new voice, ancient and feminine, a chorus of a dozen voices speaking as one. The kimono girls. You feel her pain. Her fear. Her creation. Use it. Do not just give her energy. Give her a reason to wake. A reason. He looked down at her still, broken face. He remembered the laboratory, the pain, the confusion. He remembered her fragmented memories of Dr. Fuji and AI. He remembered her misguided, desperate attempt to create a perfect world for him. Her every action, from her creation to her cataclysm, had been driven by a search for purpose, for a place to belong. He closed his eyes, shutting out the roar of the vortex and the panic of the trainers. He pushed past the pain and the fear, deep into the core of his own being. He didn't just project energy. He projected memory. He projected feeling. He showed her the first time Charmander evolved into Charmeleon, the defiant, rebellious Pokémon who refused to listen. He showed her the bond of trust they had to build from scratch. He showed her the joy of soaring through the sky on Pidgeot's back. He showed her the grief of leaving Butterfree to find its own love. He showed her the fierce loyalty of Pikachu choosing to stand by his side against a flock of angry Spearow. He poured his entire life, his entire philosophy, that bonds are forged through struggle, that love is proven through sacrifice, that strength is found in connection, not isolation, directly into her shattered consciousness. He wasn't just healing her. He was teaching her. A flicker. Deep inside the dead wasteland of her mind, a single ember glowed. She felt it. The warmth. The connection. A purpose not born of logic or security, but of shared experience. Love. The concept he had screamed at her about in his mother's house. She finally understood. It wasn't an idea. It was a force. A power. The rainbow cracks on her skin began to glow, not with chaotic energy, but with a soft, steady light. The golden river of life force from the psychics finally found purchase, flowing into channels that were reforming, rebuilding, guided by the blueprint of Ash's own heart. Mewtwo's eyes snapped open. They were no longer the cold, analytical violet of a scientist or the furious magenta of a god. They were a deep, clear amethyst, and they were filled with a profound, soul-shaking understanding. And they were fixed on Ash. Ash, her voice whispered in his mind. It was different now. Quiet. Humble. And achingly real. She sat up. The light faded, leaving her skin scarred with the faint, silvery lines of the healed cracks, a permanent reminder of her fallibility. She looked at the circle of humans who had given her their strength, at Lance, at the terrified trainers. She saw not just humans. She saw individuals, their hearts pounding with fear and a desperate, foolish hope. Then she looked at the swirling maw of the Null Gateway. The dispassionate, scientific curiosity was gone. The fury of a god whose perfection was marred was gone. All that remained was the grim resolve of a soldier looking at the enemy that threatened her home. Her real home. It's time to finish this, Ash said, climbing to his feet. He was swaying, drained from the effort, but his eyes were clear and sharp. He looked at Gary, who was now sheltered behind a rock with his repaired scanner. Gary. What have you got? A target. Gary shouted back, his voice filled with a kind of manic glee. The heart, it's not a creature. It's a singularity. A focal point where the anti-energy is so dense it's achieved a kind of pseudo-consciousness. It's actively drawing our reality into it. But it has defenses. Physical manifestations are forming around it. Corrupted husks of Pokemon, twisted shapes of shadow and teeth. It's building an army. An army needs a general, Ash said. He turned, his gaze sweeping over the last defenders of the world. Lance. You are the hammer. Punch through the front lines, draw the main body of its forces. Create a clear path for me. Lance nodded, his face set like stone. He mounted his Dragonite, his cape whipping in the wind. For a world we can rebuild, he roared to his troops. For a future. Charge. With a sound like thunder, the half-dozen dragons soared into the sky, a spear tip of fury aimed at the heart of the vortex. They were immediately beset by a swarm of null spawn, shadowy, twisted versions of Skarmory, shrieking, half-formed Golbat, and things that had no name, all claws and gnashing teeth. The sky became a chaotic canvas of fire, lightning, and dissolving shadow. Ash turned to Mewtwo. We are the sword. We go for the heart. But I can't get you there alone. You will not have to, she said. She held out her hand, and from the tree of beginning, hundreds of miles away, 3 beams of red light shot across the sky at impossible speed. They materialized on the rock beside them, the clone Charizard, Venusaur, and Blastoise. They were not just clones, they were extensions of her will, their eyes glowing with the same amethyst light as her own. Ash vaulted onto his own Charizard's back. Pikachu, let's go. Pikachu. His partner roared, a battle cry filled with a terrifying eagerness. With a beat of 4 pairs of leathery wings, they launched into the air, a 4-dragon formation with Ash at its head. They didn't engage the swarming outer defenses. They flew in the wake of Lance's suicidal charge, a silver arrow following a golden hammer. The inside of the vortex was a nightmare landscape. The laws of physics were a suggestion at best. Up was down, gravity was fickle, and the air itself was a thick, soupy miasma of dread. Twisted, Impossible shapes floated in the void, and the screams of dying null spawn and the defiant roars of Lance's dragons echoed from all directions. They saw Lance and his Dragonite, a whirlwind of destruction, tearing a path through the thickest part of the horde. He was a true champion, a beacon of defiant light in the all-consuming darkness. There. Gary's voice crackled over a small communicator Ash had grabbed. The singularity is dead ahead. But its core defenses are mobilizing. From the central mass, 3 colossal shapes detached themselves. Corrupted, titanic versions of the legendary birds, a Zapdos made of crackling anti-lightning, an Articuno of absolute zero frost that froze light itself, and a Moltres of black, life-devouring flame. I will handle them, Mewtwo's voice declared, a cold, hard diamond of resolve. Her 3 clones peeled off from the formation. The clone Venusaur launched solar beams of pure life energy that sizzled against the Moltres' black fire. The Blastoise's hydro pumps met the Articuno's ice in a battle of elemental absolutes. And the clone Charizard engaged the shadowy Zapdos in a dizzying aerial duel. It was a battle of concepts, life versus anti-life, creation versus corruption. That leaves the heart for us, Ash said, his eyes fixed on the target. The singularity was a sphere of perfect blackness, floating in the center of the chaos. It pulsed with a slow, sickening rhythm, like a diseased heart. And as they approached, it seemed to notice them. The dread intensified, a psychic pressure that screamed you are nothing, you are already gone. Don't listen to it, Pikachu. Ash yelled, focusing his own aura into a shield around him and his partner. It's a lie. They dove. Charizard unleashed a torrent of fire, not at the sphere, but at the tendrils of shadow that lashed out to intercept them. Mewtwo flew beside them, her hands glowing, firing focused blasts of psychic energy that didn't explode but unraveled the null spawn that got too close. They were feet from the singularity. Ash could feel its immense, gravitational pull, not on his body, but on his soul, his very existence. It wanted to erase him. Mewtwo stopped, hovering. This is as far as I can take you. Its aura of negation is absolute. My psychic power, my very form, will be unmade if I get closer. The final blow, it must come from you. Ash looked at her. What are you going to do? A faint, sad smile touched her lips, an expression he had never seen on her before. It was devastatingly beautiful. The great silence created a void. To seal the breach. I must do the opposite. I must fill it. She turned away from him and flew back, positioning herself between the gateway and the battle. She closed her eyes. The silver scars on her skin began to glow. She reached out, not with her power, but with her consciousness. She felt the fading life forces of Lance's dragons, the terrified hearts of his trainers, the struggling will of her own clones. She felt Gary, huddled on his rock, a tiny spark of frantic genius. She felt Pikachu's fierce, unwavering loyalty. And she felt Ash's boundless, stupid, beautiful love. She gathered it all. All the pain, all the fear, all the hope, all the love. She held the entirety of their broken, beautiful world in her mind. Ash turned back to the Black Heart. He knew what he had to do. This couldn't be won with a flamethrower or a thunderbolt. The null fed on destruction. He couldn't destroy it. He had to give it something it couldn't erase. Pikachu, he said, his voice quiet. I need everything you have. Not your power. Your spark. Your life. The thing that makes you you. Trust me. Pikachu looked at him, his little black eyes holding a wisdom beyond his years. He didn't hesitate. He gave a sharp, affirmative chew, and scrambled from Ash's shoulder onto the black sphere. The null recoiled. Pikachu wasn't an attack. He was a paradox. A creature of pure, joyful, chaotic life energy, standing on the nexus of absolute nothingness. The singularity didn't know what to do with him. Now! Ash roared, leaping from Charizard's back. He landed on the sphere next to Pikachu, his feet finding a strange purchase on its non-surface. He placed his hands flat against it. And he let go. He didn't fire his aura. He didn't attack. He opened the floodgates. He poured his life, his memories, his bonds, his love for his mother, his respect for his rivals, his devotion to his Pokémon, his new, complicated, earth-shattering love for the broken god who had saved him, all of it, into the singularity. He gave it his soul. The null had no defense against this. It could unmake matter. It could erase energy. It could not erase a memory. It could not erase a bond. It could not erase love. It was a concept so alien to its nature that it caused a system crash on a cosmic scale. The black sphere flickered. It shuddered. And then, from the points where Ash's hands and Pikachu's feet touched it, a crack of brilliant, golden-white light appeared. The light of a new sunrise. At the same moment, Mewtwo unleashed her final attack. It was not a wave of force. It was a wave of being. She took all the life she had gathered, all the love and pain and hope, and she poured it into the void she had created. It was the conceptual opposite of the Great Silence. A Genesis wave. The wave of pure life collided with the fracturing singularity. The result was not an explosion. It was a birth. A silent, blinding flash of white light expanded from the heart of the vortex, consuming everything. It didn't destroy. It rewrote. The null's corruption was overwritten by a tidal wave of pure life. The gray, dead land of the islands was instantly reclaimed by lush, vibrant green. The black, sludgy water became a sparkling, crystal-clear blue. The twisted null spawn dissolved, not into dust, but into motes of shimmering, golden light. The massive breach in the sky did not close, it was filled, sealed with a scar of pure, solidified sunlight. The world, which had been unmade, was mended. When the light faded, Ash was floating in a calm, blue sea, Pikachu paddling weakly but defiantly beside him. Charizard was there moments later, pulling them from the water. Lance's few surviving dragons were helping their trainers stay afloat. And on the shore of the newly reborn island, Mewtwo stood, her arms outstretched, her body glowing with a soft, gentle light. The Genesis wave had taken almost everything. Her godlike power, her ability to warp reality, her telekinesis, it was all gone, burned away to fuel the act of creation. She was no longer a god. She was vulnerable. She was mortal. Ash landed Charizard on the beach and ran to her. He didn't say anything. He just wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly. She felt solid. Real. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "It is quiet," she whispered in his mind, but the voice was faint, a true whisper now, requiring effort. "But it is not silent. I can hear them. Your friends. Their hearts are still beating." Humanity had not been restored. The Great Silence was not undone. But the world was saved. Ash looked up at the sky, at Lance, Gary, and the handful of human survivors making their way to the shore. He looked at his Pokémon, his family. And he looked at the powerful, beautiful, mortal being in his arms. It was not the end they had wanted. It was not the world they had lost. But it was a new beginning. A world scarred, empty, but alive. And for the first time since the breaking of the world, it was a future they would build together. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.